what can really stop it. And the bloodbath, really, I'm going to say one word, reparations.
Who ends up paying for it? Let me ask you, just as a community.
I can tell you that. I feel that the Democratic Party should pay reparations to blacks, because it was in the 1800s when the Republicans, which was known as abolitionists, separated from the Dixiecrats because they did not want to continue slavery. So after the abolitionists helped black people become Republicans and they changed their name, black people were able to own businesses. They was able to create the Black Wall Street, Rosewood. They were the most wealthiest communities in the United States. And so it was the Democratic Party who created the Ku Klux Klan, and the Klan were the ones who hated the blacks for creating Black Wall Street, and that's why they dropped the bomb on Black Wall Street. It was the Klan that did that. 2 years later, in 1923, it was the Klan that destroyed Rosewood. So if anybody owes black people money and reparation, it should be the Democratic Party, the Ku Klux Klan, which they originated from. That Democrats should be paying the money to blacks for all that they've done with slavery, the destruction of the black economic engines like Black Wall Street. I feel the Democratic Party should pay reparations to black people.
I know you hate your grocery bill just as much as I hate my grocery bill. I know you hate paying high gas just as much as I hate paying high gas. So we need to come together as one, white, black, gray, purple, orange. And for the illegals, it's proper channels to go through.
Yeah.
Like every other ethnicity, there you go. It's proper channels to go through. You shouldn't be able to come across the border illegally and receive help.
Illegally coming in my back door, you're going to get shot.
Illegally. Plain and simple.
Illegally coming into my country.
That's right.
So I understand where everyone is coming from with the illegals. There's proper ways to go through these channels to come into America and officially become an American. Just make the playing field level. What are you afraid of? Here in the black community, the kids are going to school. You go out into the white communities, the school, what they have in there, the computers and what they have in technology, we're so far behind. All this is by design. Because if you can't get out here in this world, they don't teach you how to be entrepreneurs. They don't teach you how to invest your money. We're not teaching anything like that.
And you get back to this, and it's been Democrat for 60 years.
Yes.
What the hell? Why does the black community keep voting for Democrats?
Because we've been brainwashed. When I was coming up in my household, it was a straight Democratic ticket.
Black people better understand this. If we don't stand together and we don't make a change, they've already brought the replacements in for us.
Yeah.
If we don't shut the borders in the black community and get all the illegals out of our community, there will be no more black.
So we're returning again with another edition of our hard-hitting, white-hot broadcast that we've been doing. And we have a lot of stuff coming in the works, a lot of projects that are starting to begin to take form here. A lot of different interesting authors and researchers and activists and intellectuals are emailing us in the background. A lot of people are interested in having conversations with us here at Looking Glass Forum. We're pretty well known now for our dedication to the truth and to our pursuit of it as we see it. And it's hard to break off the demagoguery, right, of the Mockingbird corrupt corporate news brainwash system, right? The PSYOPs, and of course they just didn't invent that mechanism for total conditioning and dumbing down and the python-like grip of the warming lie, right? The warming and comforting lies of the fake news, right, guys? It's fake news. Let's be real. And so the whole thing exists to be fake news and to steer the American people where they want them to go. And to not report the mass shootings that they don't want to report on, right? Hone in and focus in on the intense manhunt of the individuals that play into their narrative, right, guys? And we all know what that is. But we have to recognize that this capacity for conditioning and brainwashing and diverting and focusing the attention of the mass population is not something they just invented yesterday, but that whole process and this kind of kabuki theater that we're looking at has gotten honed to technotronic scientific perfection, but it's always been the process of working through and contextualizing the historical narrative between different warring parties, different national and rising empires who want to ultimately shape the world in their own image and to build and erect monuments to their own gods and their own likenesses. That they will decide who and what form and shape and identity the deity that they worship will take, and really ultimately the deity is an idol. It's a craftsmanship of the work of the hands of those idolaters who won't ultimately submit to the reality and the truth of God as he is, but want to, as they control and attempt to manipulate and reshape everything else in the world around them to their own image, and so they do this in the same way. And so the New World Order, the New Age, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, right? Even NATO, G8 Summit, right? It's all one thing. The Chatham House, right? These are all structures that were to help the imperialists of the City of London to ultimately control their massive empire and these massive multi-million acre estates of mineral resources and wealth all around the world that they alone only really knew about and understood and could even really grasp how the Indian sacred mountains were really mineral rich resources, and so the sacerdotal Indian rights would ultimately have to be misplaced, replaced over time. And so it's easy to see the tangible political chords of the reflexive imperial tyranny and its militancy around the world through the East Indian Trading Company, etc. But it's harder to see the spiritual nature and the unseen occult realms that are still behind the curtains, still the underworkings of which we can intuit are there, but we can't directly observe because they're lost to us in history. But we know the dynamics, we know the groups, we know what's been going on ultimately through time in this process of getting away to control the world, control America, to restrain the unrestrainable masses. And so this is where we're going to get into this process of understanding how controlling the classroom and controlling ideation, controlling the news, the newsprint, even controlling the words and the components of the debate, all the nomenclature of the philosophical framework are ultimately going to be the key components that we should focus on and how we use them. And so we've always confronted these racial issues that are being presented to America with the hardest criticism and the most intense skepticism, as we recognize ultimately that the dialectical component, the dialectical warfare that we're being subsumed into here in America is going to begin and end with the process of our speech, the written word, the spoken word, and the way in which the context of that modern jargon frames our thinking, right? So the whole process of understanding ourselves here in America is ultimately atomized and fractured by this deliberate and really Machiavellian ruse to break down and deteriorate American society at its weakest points, right? By getting us all to collectively accept this idiosyncrasy in our discussion in terming and referring to ourselves one to another as blacks and whites, right? So there's nothing that could be more destructive or acidic or corrosive to our collective national ego as American people than to just divide ourselves like this in the most irrational and pseudo-scientific way. So there's no precision or refinement or definition that relates human beings to such terms, but it's really just it's quite the opposite. It's really derogatory and artificial prejudice that really pins us to this chaotic and hateful primitive nature, sub-nature that we really have as humans, that America as a nation calls us to ultimately rise above. So in the words and the defining words and characteristics and the constitutional soul and conscience of America, and the words and also in the deeds of having gone to such great lengths over time to demonstrate that we are human beings of character and of a moral disposition and identity that, as we're known to have made clear to the world, that the particular skin composition and complexion and tone, as it appears to other people, has little to do. Now, of course, these leftists and these Democrats and these ex-slave owners and ex-Confederates, right, ex-Ku Klux Klan originators, but ultimately with individuals like Albert Pike, who was a Confederate general, definitely a Democrat, and definitely pined away to own slaves, right? Typical Democrat, obsessing over the racial issue of putting one up and putting others down.
They're not to have any crime rate. They're guests. It's so frustrating. And it is just right before the debate. They're trying to preempt that. He doesn't even know anything about the Marin family and the mother of five. He doesn't care. This is all collateral damage. And the way they look at the border is, as I said before, it's going to take you guys, I don't know, 5, 10, 20, 30 years to deal with what we did in just 3.5. We let in 10 million people. We destroyed the border. Psychologically, there is no border as our global utopia. It hasn't worked. There is no border. Now, when you come in, as soon as you come in and you build a wall, we're going to sue you. As soon as you stop, catch, and release, we're going to call you racist. As soon as you make people, once again, apply for amnesty in their own country, we're going to say you're xenophobic. We're going to keep doing that, and we're going to cherry pick judges, and you're not going to get this done. And then you're going to, what, deport 10 billion? Don't you know how we work? Don't you know the leftist mind? We let in 10 million illegally. We don't audit it. We don't care. They're here illegally. They entered illegally. They have probably illegal ID and so. I shouldn't say that. Now I was in an airport and you can see that they just fly right through. So that's new. And what they're basically saying to everybody is the medicine that you're going to use to stop the illegal immigration will be worse than the illegal immigration because you don't know what we're going to say. We're going to say that you're Nazis trying to round up illegal aliens. We can't use the word. Poor people and the oppressed and the victimized are now being rounded up by the Trump racist clique. That's what we have to look forward to.
Yeah.
And it won't stop until somebody says, sorry, you're the racist. You're the one that is trying to let in people for demographic and voting purposes. You're the one that are renegades. You're destroying democracy. You don't have a legal right to destroy the border. The president's supposed to execute the existing laws. He didn't do it. And that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to have a leader that says that. It says, do your worst and I'll do my best. I don't care. And if you have that attitude, you might make some progress. But it's going to be very hard to undo the last 3.5 years of the Biden administration.
And so you can see Democrats today have now established the rising new black Klan, right? So that the racial dynamic is just totally reversed, and so that the white populace is meant by the mass media to depict derogatorily white people as a new Negro to be abused and to be put upon and to be looked at as racially and genetically inferior, as subhumans, right? So this is the new black Klan, and they have their own moral rightness based on their skin tone and their skin color, and they could just wear black capes and black pointed hats and black hoods and ride around on black stallions and just, lynch and spear white people wherever they go, right? So it's the new black Klan, and that's what you're getting. And this similitude, this idea is not fully formed in the social narrative, in the context of the literary and journalistic imagery that's created out of the Mockingbird printing press over there, which is just like full-time 24/7 CIA psyop controlling Reuters and AP News, right, all day long. It's well known, everyone knows it. Even Google can't block it, right? It's just the CIA mouthpiece. And so, you're just going to get the formulation of a world that destroys humanity, devaluates life, and dissolves the national pure culture, right? The statehood of the nation within the populace will be attacked and destroyed, as you're seeing every day as you look.
Well, because the theft in 2020 was so obvious, we got to observe it. We got to observe exactly what they did. We got to watch the vote mules dump 10, 20 ballots multiple times at these drop boxes on video. Okay, so we watched the drop boxes. Done. a plan's been implemented on that. We know that a lot of these ballots that they used did not get signature verified. So they took legal action and they just had victories in multiple states dealing with signature verification, where you can't just assume it is a verified signature anymore. And if it doesn't have a verified signature, it can't count. Well, those did count in 2020, so they've taken care of that issue. We know that they were double, triple, quadruple stuffing ballots in heavily blue areas like Atlanta. We witnessed them do that. Arizona, we witnessed them do that. We have sworn affidavits and eyewitnesses to them doing that. Okay, so we know that that's what they do. These deep blue areas, they triple count the ballots to increase the lead for the Democrats. You really think Georgia is a blue state? Are you kidding me? They were triple and quadruple counting ballots in Fulton County, folks. Duh. And they got caught. They were also pulling secret tranches of ballots out from under the table. You know, we have new listeners here every day. Some people might not even know about this. They had a fake water main break. What? I don't know. You tell me. They did a fake water main break, and they cleared out the tabulation centers, the biggest one in Atlanta, and they said, oh, go home, there's a water main break. Okay. And then everybody leaves, and then the Democrat Party operatives stay behind and pull out secret tranches of ballots and start stuffing them rapidly, urgently into the tabulation machines. And then Biden takes the lead and wins. Okay, so we've seen them do that. Okay, well, now we know that that's going on. The Republicans have hired thousands, if not tens of thousands, and trained poll watchers to be on site 24/7 at these tabulation centers. They've also hired lawyers to be on site at these tabulation centers 24/7. Again, remember what they did in Philadelphia when they were blocking out the windows into the tabulation centers? Gee. It's like, you know, when your young son or daughter brings their first boyfriend or girlfriend home and wants to, you know, close the door to the bedroom, whatever, hey, leave the door open. It's like, no. Oh, yeah, they're going to close the door. Oh, I wonder why. They don't want you to see what's going on in there. It's like, the Democrats don't want you to see what's going on in the tabulation centers. I wonder why. Because they're fucking you. That's why. I mean, it's so ridiculous. They don't even hide it. That's how desperate they were. Okay, so we see them do that now. Again, now we'll have lawyers on scene, poll watchers on scene. They won't be able to do this. And by the way, crew's doing a great job. They're showing all of this. Oh, yeah, there's the mail trucks. I believe that was in Detroit. Happened in Milwaukee, actually, too. It was in Milwaukee and it was in Detroit. Two states the Democrats stole from Trump. And truckloads of ballots show up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, wow, the magic. 3 o'clock in the morning. And then it's 300,000 votes for Biden. And just enough to put him over the edge. And then they call the election and Biden wins. 7 in the morning. And then it's 300,000 votes for Biden. And just enough to put him over the edge. And then they call the election and Biden wins. So, I mean, folks, that's what I'm saying. We have the entire story here. That there is no gray area. We have all the evidence, the video evidence, the data evidence, the eyewitness, the sworn affidavits, all of it. The circumstantial evidence. Trump gets 20,000 at a rally, Biden can't get 20. In 5 states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Trump is winning all day long, all night long. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, magic ballots show up, put Biden ahead of Trump, and then they stop voting. And we have the footage of them triple counting the ballots. And we have the footage of them delivering the trucks full of ballots. So it's an open shut case. But they tricked us on January 6th. And they shut down the legitimate questions and investigations into the elections. They got us. Democrats got us. They stood down national security. They had their provocateurs in the crowd. They got us. So we've learned that too. Hey, we're dealing with professional agitators. We're dealing with professional criminals. We're dealing with professional terrorists. We're dealing with professional election stealers. So they were ahead of us in 2020. We can admit that. That's all right. But now we're on their playing field. Now we know their game plan. Now we know how they rig and cheat and manipulate and stage and lie and deceive. Now, you could still be concerned about the rig. Certainly, with good reason. I'm just telling you, when you say nothing's been done, that's just inaccurate.
So it's time for everyone to ultimately turn towards some kind of political agenda, or all the intense programming, intense biological toxins that they're deploying to make sure that these individuals are going to be turned into some kind of transgender monsters, right? And lose all connection with the humanity and the actual reproductive and beautiful natural human product that was ultimately underneath there. And so once that destruction happens, like Yuri Bezmenov says, once that destruction happens of these certain stages of childhood development, right? And you can see a lot of the early psychologists that were going to come out of Germany and ultimately out of Skull and Bones, right? All these Skull and Bones men early on were obsessed with the developmental stages of childhood and figuring out when you could really program people up in the universities and Leipzig or whatever, right? I mean, you guys go do the research. It's already like making me ill. I'm already world sick from it. You know, just learning all this. It just becomes overwhelming in the end. But it does urge us on. It does make the mission here critical. It makes the objective here to work harder, to reach out to this small but growing and intense audience that we have here, who's heard of this kind of talk before, right? Heard of these kind of conversations before, and knew that the Rex 84 program existed, and knew that the supposedly fictional books and fictional characters depicted in the stories do not really shield from view that the storylines in many of these particular novels would ultimately tie in with Operation Garden Plot and the King Alfred Plan. And of course, the King Alfred Plan is supposedly a fictional novel, but Edward Mandell House also had his book, Philip Drew, the administrator, who was the secret controller of the government and the president. But of course, Edward Mandell House really was Philip Drew. And so even though it is a fictional story and a fictional novel, the context within the story is very real, very revealing at the same time. And so the same thing is true with the King Alfred Plan. You can see that they would use the prospect of going into the cities, into these communities of African Americans, people who have melanin in their skin, people whose families had just generations ago been freed from the incarceration and the servitude of the slave plantations of the Democrats and the Ku Klux Klan and the Confederacy, right? Now we're living in the families. Now we have children who have been going to school and becoming part of American society and living in the cities. And in this new era of the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, the 1930s, and the 1940s, the development of the families within African American communities is very strong. You have to go back and watch the Civil War movie Glory before Hollywood started promoting everything into twisted lies, and see that the freed slaves would fight on the side of the North against their own brothers in this massive civil war to determine the outcome of Lincoln's plan to end slavery in America, right? Of course, it was a devastating controversy and an absolute war of annihilation that the world's never seen. Hitler and other dictators later in history would discuss the Civil War and take historical lessons from it, and would recognize the influence, the Machiavellian subterfuge, and the menacing machinations behind the scenes of the Jesuit order in the Civil War, in the gray uniforms of the South, right? And it would be much like the gray uniforms of the Nazis, right? Certain of their divisions, their main divisions, would don the same gray uniforms of the Confederate South, and look to the military encampments that the various North and South used against each other, and use that as an example for what would happen in the building of Auschwitz. It's just the reality of the fact. People don't understand history this way because they go to college or go to university and they decimate and fragment history into such ribbons. It's like trying to take a sheet of paper that's been put through the shredder and piece it back together again after you've been put through their history classes, right? Totally insane. Totally detached from reality. So we carry on with this episode just to point out that here in America, this delusion that we have that we're under, that we're blacks and whites, right? And if it was good for us, if it was wholesome, if it was the real thing, if it was the real genuine article, then would they put forward this idea of Black History Month? It really buries the history of the people under this word black, because it's nothing. There's no continent of black, a blackia. Right? There is no black, guys. That is nothing. I'm not a white. I'm an Irishman with some German ancestry as well. And so the context of just whiteness that just seems to be this global brainwash that takes over the world. It doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to people in Australia who are Australian men, who have native Australian Aboriginal tribes, people that live there. And then we can't call them black. I mean, we can't just bury the entire dignity and conceptualization and history of those people under this broad castigation. Right? It's racial castigation. And it's demagoguery of the highest order to call ourselves whites and blacks. But it's how you'll get this new black Klan, right? And so many African Americans who have through their Bible on their shelf and go to church and worship God and carry on that Judeo-Christian heritage and legacy to their kids are not blacks. Right? They're not blacks. They're human beings. They're Americans who are from a sub-Saharan extraction historically, and who have a little bit extra melanin pigment in their skin tone, and they're not blacks because it's an irrelevant term. It doesn't refer to anyone. And so you have all these people around. You got people who are Saskatchewan Indians, and they're talking about I'm black. I'm not white. And the Jews are very confused because some of them will disown the idea of being white. They're Jews. They're not white, and these other people. They're Jews and they won't say they're black, so they're white. So we're all deranged under the lunacy of this polarizing and destructive and chaotic witchcraft that's within the architecture of our language as we call each other blacks and whites. We think of ourselves that way. So in order to really address this issue as a people, we have to kind of go back to the drawing board on how we're going to work with the English language over here. We have to be a little bit more adept and intellectual, a little more rigorous in our vocabulary, guys. Because white and black magic, white and black sorcery from the Freemason Lodge, and white and black idea viruses that control the architecture of our humanity over this idea of racialness, ending all whiteness, power to blackness, and that's why we're going to have the rise of the new Black Klan now. Because it's just the artifice of the Democrats. It's the artifice of the one who could create the new white Klan in the first place. Because the KKK, now they'll just have the BBB or whatever, right? And they'll put people all the way through the ringer of that thing and destroy people with it, as you see that they're doing. And the thought just has to come to mind, the words have to be uttered, the frame of the reference of the idea has to come into play for people to recognize, well, we're in a new Black Klan. So you have to give up your African-Americanness. You have to give up the Christian roots of your history as the people of God who were freed from the chains of the slavery of the South, because these African-Americans came here and learned their Bible and had created some of the strongest institutions of faith that we have in America here in the South, in these Southern Black churches. They didn't get to be Southern African-American churches within these African-American communities just from nothing, right? They came to be that way, formed that way, and they're under attack, as you can see, by the deep state, by the entire structure of the old neo-Confederacy of the Democrats, the neo-KKK, right, who has taken on a life of its own and found their new power base within the racial dynamic within the so-called black community versus the white community. And of course, you can sure bet your bottom dollar that these same Democrat forces of old, these same Confederate Klans forces of old, still have their ties within the so-called quote-unquote white community. They're spoiling for this racial fight, the Democrats, these neo-Confederates. And of course, we, the Republicans of Lincoln, right, are hoping for the best and are passing out Bibles to all the people of color, the people who have melanin in their skin, the people who are not black, right? That's ridiculous. And it's dismissive. And it's a state of invective that puts constant controversy and constant conflict within this would-be united people. So in order for us to unite in America, it's time to put off this superimposed racial dynamic of black versus white and these politics of division, this politics of racialism within these terms. And we have to recognize that we are American people, we are American citizens, and we have the inheritance of this Constitution, of this Bill of Rights, this Declaration of Independence is ours. The freedom of religion that you see these wonderful African-American communities who are still clinging on to their God and their gold and their guns, right? Like the rest of America is, clinging to their Bibles. Many of those bitter clingers that Obama talked about are Americans who served in armed forces, who never thought that they would live to see a day when when black people would far more than just become equal parts of society, but would become people that are being beckoned. African Americans are being instigated into rising into this racial paradigm that they were once the victim of by the powerful Freemason lodges and knighthood orders who who controlled the Confederate South, who controlled the slave trade, the Knights of the Golden Circle, etc., and who were the power players behind the populist revolt of the KKK, right? So you can see that this new out-of-control criminal rap culture headed by rapists like Puff Daddy, right, are now rising into this state of becoming a widely antagonistic racial movement. And so that's why we say the new black Klan.
The Hunter Biden conviction on 3 felonies. And I want to make the point that, to me, the biggest significance of this ruling is not connected with the gun issue at all. It's not even really connected with the issue of Joe Biden and the pardon. It's not connected really with the issue of jail time or no jail time for Hunter Biden. It's simply this. The one thing that became crystal clear in the trial was the validation of the authenticity of the Hunter Biden laptop. Now, the Hunter Biden laptop, as you know, has been a source of controversy for now more than 3 years, actually 4 years. It was the laptop whose existence the story was broken by the New York Post. It was a story that was censored across the board on digital media. It was dismissed and ridiculed in mainstream media. You remember the 51 intelligence officers who signed a statement. Actually, it was not 51. It was really 60. There were 9 unnamed figures who were also on that list. So 51 is the way people normally say it. So I'm going to say 51. But it was really 60. Nevertheless, these guys all said this has the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. That qualified statement, the hallmarks, meaning the signature, the fingerprints, was then amplified into this is Russian disinformation. That's the message we got from CNN, from MSNBC. So this is a major reversal, because now the Biden DOJ itself goes before the jury and goes, we've authenticated the laptop is real, it's authentic, it's Hunter Biden's laptop, the Russians were not involved, they did not plant material on the laptop. So all that stuff on the laptop, all of it, the hookers, the cocaine, all the disgusting behavior that's portrayed on the laptop, and all the corruption, all the secret meetings, all the money changing hands, all the records of transactions, it's all authentic. And so you would expect at this point, or maybe these days we are trained now not to expect, but there needs to be some sort of a reckoning, doesn't there? And yet, not only is there no reckoning, but here I have an article in the New York Post, ex-Intel officials who smeared posts report on Hunter's laptop as Russian disinfo stand by signing letter. And a couple of these guys basically they just say, no, I'm not going to remove my name. And others offer completely bogus rationales. Here's Mark Zaid, an attorney for several of the signatures. Here's what he says. There continues to be by many a calculated or woefully ignorant interpretation of the October 2020 letter signed by 51 former intelligence officials. A careful and objective reading of the document shows that even today its content is accurate. What? Accurate how? Well, he basically goes on to say it's accurate because it doesn't say it was Russian disinformation. It merely said it has the hallmarks. This is very disingenuous, because the point of saying that it has all the hallmarks is to say that it is Russian disinformation. In other words, we experts looking at this laptop see in it the indications, the DNA, the fingerprints of a Russian operation. And that's what people believe. They're like, well, we're not the experts, but you are, so we'll have to take your word for it. And yet, here is another guy, Greg Freverton, chairman of the National Intelligence Council. What we said was true. We were inferring from our experience, and it did look like a Russian operation. We didn't and couldn't, of course, say it was a Russian operation. So the same kind of defense. We thought we saw some familiar signs of a Russian operation. Well, what were those signs? Just the fact that it was damaging to the Bidens? Just the fact that it contained all this detail on Hunter? Now, Hunter himself dropped off the laptop at this repairman shop, and the repairman was the guy who turned it in. So where did the Russians come into the picture? When you can actually trace the lineage, the genealogy of the laptop straight back to Hunter. Where was there any evidence the Russians got involved with this at all? There was absolutely none. It's quite clear that this is a treasonous effort to interfere with the 2016 election. This is what, with the 2020 election. This is what these intelligence officials were all about. And that's why many of them, when they were asked to sign, they didn't do any work on their own. They just got a call from one of their buddies, hey, will you sign? And it was like, this. They probably said, this will help like Joe Biden get across the finish line. Oh, okay, I'll sign. Yeah, I'm happy to give my name because we, the intelligence establishment, do not like Trump, will do anything we can to help Biden get elected. So I think that if Trump is elected, these guys need to be investigated, need to be indicted, need to be prosecuted, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Now, this will be their defense. Their defense will be, well, based on our experience, we thought it was legitimate. So let them make that defense, but let them make that defense in court. The reason that these people are so arrogant is that none of them have had any accountability at all. Think about the big scandal that preceded this one, and that is the Russia collusion scandal. Trump is a Russian asset. He's in the pocket of Putin. The Trump campaign has been collaborating with Putin. All of it false, all of it made up. And yet, who has been called to account? Who has been forced to retract? Who has been charged? Who has been prosecuted? Answer, nobody.
So welcome back after that interesting discussion, that little audio clip that we had for you there. And we're just doing our best to keep this conversation forum open here. Hope you guys will support us. We have a lot of support, a lot of interaction recently, a lot of feedback, and we really appreciate that. I hope you will keep it, you keep the emails coming. If you can hit us up on Cash App or GiveSendGo, it'll be great. And of course, we're just a tiny little podcast out there in the profoundly colossal internet podcast sphere that's going on. This podcast space is absolutely dynamic and crucial for us here in Western civilization who want to be able to break through the Google cloister of information, the process of imprisoning us within these algorithm ghettos that disallow us to have real conversations or actually debate the really truly salient facts that are affecting our world today, and that we must have the information at our disposal so we can correctly direct our democratic republic, our constitutional republic here in America. And our democratic process is dissolved and destroyed if we cannot get the correct information, or we don't know who the right individuals that we should put forward for government are, who the individuals we should put forward for our judicial circuits and for judges throughout America.
Joining us now to discuss the increasingly hostile handling of the conservatives on the Supreme Court is Mark Paoletta, Senior Fellow at the Center for Renewing America and co-editor of Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words. Mark, thank you for coming on.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
So first of all, you wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal recently saying it's open season on the Supreme Court, and especially Clarence Thomas, who you know very well and you've written a book on. What is driving the attacks, and why are they coming now?
The left is furious that they don't control the Supreme Court anymore. For decades, the left has had a reliable ally in the court to implement their left-wing agendas. Think abortion on demand, race-based affirmative action, all of these things that were upheld by the Supreme Court, acting as a sort of super legislature. And Justice Thomas, whose confirmation I worked on back in 1991, was the beginning long ago of the seeds, the foundation of an originalist court. And because he's a Black conservative, the left is triggered by Justice Thomas because of their racist views of how a Black person should think. And so he has been unbowed for 30 years, more than 30 years on the Supreme Court. And all of these recent cases over the past few years with this kind of more originalist court, from the Dobbs decision to the affirmative action decision last year, taken on the administrative state, religious liberties, all of these things are things that Justice Thomas has been writing about for more than 30 years. And his dissents and concurrences are now majority opinions. And what you see, John, is that in the past several years, when it's springtime and the court's going to be coming down with blockbuster decisions, sort of dismantling this left-wing body of law, they want to undermine the court to either intimidate the justices so that they change their opinions, trim their sails on some of the opinions, and ultimately, if they're not successful with that, they're laying the groundwork to pack the court if they win in 2024, if they win the White House, if they win, the House and Senate. I do believe they will pack the Supreme Court, which means they will try and add 4 new justices to the court to kind of wipe away this conservative majority that's in place now. Justice Thomas has been the person they've been targeting for 30 years. The high-tech lynching in 1991, the belittling of him as a justice when he went on the court, absolutely racist, absolutely despicable, despite what they tried to do to him. It's the Thomas court. They've lost the battle of ideas. Thomas has never bowed to them. As he always says, I just do my job, my job, and they hate him for it. And that's why they go after him time and time again. And his wife, in terms of just how can we make life difficult? How can we try and undermine Justice Clarence Thomas, who, in my opinion, is the greatest Supreme Court justice and our greatest living American. And it's why it's necessary and important to defend him and for people to write and push back on these lies.
So this process of controlling all the information that we are able to consume is the real war, right? And of course, InfoWars is an interesting cultural phenomenon that we've had to witness. But of course, you can see that within the background, within that limited hangout, all the information that they're exposing and the good that they do, their operation seems to unwittingly, carefully cover up the really dubious and dangerous and destructive forces that are directing this technocratic takeover of society. And of course, the technotronic instrumentality of world government takes away out of view this human accountability that democracy gives us, right? Democracy gives us this human accountability. We know who voted up or who voted down. We know who put the policy into place or who took it away. We know who added the funding or who took the funding away. We know the information, who to hold accountable and what individual to take out of office and what individual we should promote. And so this idea of a technocracy, of a technate, which you're seeing take place in the EU, is this process of ambiguous and inhuman, sterilized deliberation, like a computer, right? Like a computer support lawyer, right? In these futuristic movies, we see the idea of just like an automated response system that has no soul, no feeling, and no ability to take into account extenuating circumstances. And so you see them arriving at this place where they can reverse the foundational pillars of society, and through this process of conspiracy, right? And it's been a while since we have been able to use the word conspiracy, right? It reminds me of the word vaccine lately, right? The whole term conspiracy, the idea that, and of course, it's in the criminal code, right? The idea that people can conspire to commit crimes, obviously that's a legitimate thing, but this whole idea of conspiracy theorists, right? That term, it's still used as like a way to castigate people, to try to put them on the fringe and undermine what they're talking about. Of course, more and more now we can see that the files are being released, and it clearly depicts the truth that JFK was assassinated by the CIA, by actors within our own government. Famously, the book came out early out, Vatican Assassins. Eric John Phelps, who was early on the issue, exposing the fact that Cardinal Spellman, the New York City Vatican power elite, right, power broker in Washington, D.C., who heads the St. Patrick's Cathedral, I believe, and heads is the titular head of the Knights of Malta and the Papal Knights and Knights of Columbus, and etc., within the United States. And some refer to him as the American Pope because of his tremendous power that he wields here. And so you can see he was one of the main individuals who was behind the Kennedy assassination. Obviously, without that particular individual, in your planning committee for the assassination of JFK, it's not something that could be accomplished in the way that it was. Totally covered up, totally handled. And it's the same thing with this COVID-19 hoax that's been perpetrated against the American people with this bioweapon. Of course, Alex Jones was talking about that early too. And we have to look at some of the exposure that InfoWars and Alex Jones has put forward, but lately he's been totally inundated and saturated with these like ghoulish, like, I don't know, quote unquote anti-Zionist, anti-Jew haters, and the whole pretext for their hatred is this complaint about the Zionist or Jewish lobby influencing the American government. You can hear your own show going on and on about it. And so, you know what, that's a really interesting and meaningful criticism of the powerful and incredibly wealthy lobbyists in Washington, D.C., who are there to push whatever agenda to the Democrats or Republicans on the behalf of their own nation. And so they don't seem to be interested in anything else other than just creating political lines of communication and influence within Washington, D.C. But I fail to understand how that makes them different than Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Brazil or China or anyone else in the world who has people over there on K Street or whatever who are there just to be professional influencers and take people out to dinner and spread around largesse and money to try to curry favor and influence in Washington, D.C. So I still don't understand how that refines down to like a Jew hate. Like the Jews are at the top of the learned elders of the protocols of Zion, anti-hate. So I'm not for any undue political influence in Washington, D.C. to the Congress or Senate or what have you. And I'm dubious about all these K Street lobbyists. So I don't want to see United Arab Emirates up there getting undue influence in Washington, D.C. I don't want George Soros getting undue influence. I don't want the Vatican, right? I don't want the Vatican up there with its prelates and this representatives and archbishops and whatnot up there trying to get undue influence either. And that's what we have. That's what you have with InfoWars. That's the problem you have with Alex Jones is they won't really point at their own bias. But at the end of the day, their own underlying fundamental bias is for a Roman Catholic or a Romanist worldview. It doesn't even have to be fundamentally Catholic, but just a Romanist worldview, right? Where they've gotten used to in this world that they live in, seeing the Santa Claus and the reindeer sleigh, and that's kind of what they're defending. That's ultimately what they're defending is their traditions and the values as they understood them to be in the last 80 years. Because if you go back, these particular Roman Catholic values, like I always go back to, this era of the silver screen when you had Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra singing the old Christmas carols, right, and making them highly popular and bringing them to life on the silver screen in Hollywood when it first came into existence. And so it was this slow, subtle shift from the historical governing constitutional architecture that is arising out of the Protestant Reformation and historically out of the documents of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And little by little, over the course of time, we're beginning to just lose track and lose touch with the foundation basis of our actual Judeo-Christian religious foundation. And of course, when I say Judeo-Christian, I don't mean the Roman Church, because the Roman Church of the papacy and the Vatican, etc., were never considered to be part of Christianity. So it's just lately when you have these kind of subtle InfoWars operators who they're starting to bring back this idea of Christianity as ultimately connecting to and being a part of the Vatican, because they're promoting these ideas of these Roman Catholic traditions like Christmas, like Easter, etc., etc., that have become normalized aspects of American society, supposedly. So we're supposed to just accept Easter egg bunny, and Santa Claus in a sleigh with reindeer. It's just the fundamental building block of America. But of course, it never was. Not until the last 80 years, right? 90 now. Every decade goes by, we have to keep adding it up. So you don't have to say the last 100 years. But American history was founded by deists and theological students and Bible believers who are fundamentally trying to create a permanent foundation for their religious beliefs and for the freedom of others' religious beliefs as well. The freedom of religion. Of course, you can't have Protestantism in a Roman Catholic world where the king and the papacy have ordered you to burn to death, to be burned auto da fe at the stake, right? That's not a world where religious freedom can be tolerated. The same thing is true right now if you go over to nations like in Turkey and etc., where they want to reestablish the caliphate, the Islamic caliphate, and they don't have freedom of religion there either. So we have to understand Romanism is just to be a Vatican caliphate under the Pope as the caliph, as the ultimate religious world figure, the ultimate emperor. So from the time of Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and George Washington, everyone understood that they were shitting the redcoats, who were the emissaries of the Jesuit King George III, who was a lapdog and a kneeler before the Pope, right? Get the little red cushion out, get down and kneel, kiss the Pope's slipper. That's what King George III would do, right? Ultimately, he was there to reestablish or perpetuate Roman Vatican power, geopolitical power across the face of the earth. That's what King George III was raised up by his Jesuit masters to do. And those are just facts, guys. Those are just facts. Facts ultimately change opinions over time, not the other way around, right? Ultimately, as we get more information, we refine the facts, we refine the information, the knowledge, and our opinion and our attitude and our understanding becomes more clear. So, our whole struggle here in America to establish political liberty has been a consequence and an expression of the Protestant Reformation, going back to 1517 and October 29th and, Martin Luther, all that. July 4th, we discussed that in this program before. July 4th was the famous date signifying European rebellion against the papacy. That's why July 4th was made an important day of our Declaration of Independence, a day of our freedom here in America. Independence Day. And so independence was also independence from the clutches of the tyranny of the Roman Catholic monarchs of the Antichrist in Rome, right? That we had broken away and created our own nation, created our own liberty, and we were going to self-govern. We didn't need Napoleon III, right? We didn't need some kind of royal dignitary from bloodlines in Europe to come and rule over us like princelings. No, all we needed to do was to be educated, have our Bibles and our guns and our black powder, right? Our cannons, and we have the ability to create a society where people's freedoms and political liberty and their individual protections were the law, right? Not the Pope's whims or the arbitrary rulings of some kind of insane king over all the subjects of men. We were no longer subjects now. We were free men, free women. So the people of the United States are not willingly and rightly going to give up that freedom and that liberty without a fight, without being dumbed down in the school systems with communism and bizarre perversions right in the classrooms. Inappropriate. There's nothing common, decent, or good about putting adult-themed concepts and sexualizations in the classroom for kids. So they should just be learning information and scholasticism, right? So that's just part of the Yuri Bezmenov breakdown and destruction and demoralization process that America is undergoing. And of course, there are not many institutions out there that are capable of executing such a powerful agenda, such a large conspiracy over the minds of an entire nation for generations, right? I mean, what kind of groups ultimately could even have the capacity to do this?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. Great to have you with us. Our guest today is the brilliant cybersecurity expert, Mike Benz. He's the executive director for the Foundation for Freedom Online. And the last time Mike and I were talking, we ran a little bit out of time, but we had some unfinished business to get to regarding Bill Barr, the NSA, the CIA, and much more. And now I'm pleased to say with us is Mike Benz, and as I have often said, no one comes in a close second to him when it comes to his knowledge of the intelligence community, cyber, and the machinations of the various interested parties that make up the federal government. Mike, it's great to have you back with us, and thank you for your time as always. I want to start with where we were the last time we were speaking. We were talking about a fellow by the name of Bill Barr, who started his career, you were saying, as a mop-up man for the CIA, and as you noted, he ended his career in much the same way. I'd like to go back to that point where he's mopping up and the foundation for all that followed in his career. So, if you will, take us back to the early 70s. The Church Committee is raging. The Ellsberg papers, the Pentagon papers, are on everyone's minds, and their fears are in their hearts because of what we learned. Bring us up to that point.
So, Bill Barr was the Attorney General twice now in our nation's history. The most recent time for the Trump administration, and then also under former CIA director turned vice president turned president George Bush from 1991 until the turnover to the Clinton administration in 1993, and how he rose to the position of Attorney General not once but twice was a career through the CIA. So in the early 1970s, Bill Barr was a CIA analyst who then was vaulted into a role of CIA liaison to Congress during the Church Committee hearings when the CIA was under the gun of Congress, both the Church Committee and Pike Committee. There were simultaneous House and Senate hearings that effectively established the first congressional oversight of the CIA. The CIA was created in 1947. It had no formal congressional oversight until the Church Committee hearings in 1975. That's what established what is now our Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and our House Intelligence Committee. And those hearings were absolutely devastating to the CIA's reputation. Folks may recall Frank Church, the senator, holding up the heart attack gun, for example, which was unveiled, used as an assassination weapon by the agency to kill people, but instead of it looking like a murder, it would look like a heart attack because of the unique method of death that the dart from the gun would cause. The CIA was also busted assassinating world leaders like Lumumba in Congo and Allende in Chile, and was essentially a whole coterie of things from regime change operations to control over the media, both internationally and even domestically at home, as well as CIA activities to manipulate student groups and in order to manipulate them from an anti-war posture into a pro-war posture. All of this came to the fore in the Church Committee hearings in 1975, and Frank Church was seeking these sensitive documents about CIA secrets, and Bill Barr was credited as the man inside the CIA who successfully blocked much of that. A lot of people to this day who are concerned about intelligence community oversight talk about the Church Committee as being something of a whitewash because most of the sensitive documents Congress was seeking were blocked. And they were blocked by none other than Bill Barr, who then would reprise his role as a janitor sweeping up CIA secrets, blocking them from American public access or knowledge or oversight from Congress in the Iran-Contra scandal of the early 1980s. This was when the Congress had passed a bill prohibiting U.S. taxpayer money flowing to the Nicaraguan Contras, who the Bush administration was trying to orchestrate a coup to turn over their democratically elected government. But the CIA and the National Security Council went behind Congress's back and essentially engaged in a combination of drug smuggling, paramilitary arms running, money laundering, and it all came crashing down when one of the CIA pilots was shot down over Nicaragua, and his basically CIA badge was found on his person. This popped open the Iran-Contra scandal, and it was Bill Barr once again who, in the early 1980s, then fended off Congress from any sort of thorough investigation of the CIA's role in it. And then basically they threw the hammer at the National Security Council's Poindexter and others, who were then pardoned, and they got away with it. So they got away with it in the 70s. They got it thanks to Bill Barr. They got away with it in the 80s thanks to Bill Barr. And Bill Barr's reward for being such a good janitor, sweeping it up for the intelligence community's crimes, was that he was made head of the criminal justice system of the United States for George Bush, who was the CIA director himself in 1976 before ultimately becoming president. And then, of course, it was those same CIA scandals that came back to haunt the Trump administration when the CIA on January 6, 2017, first wrote the memo that declared the 2016 election to be functionally invalid because Russia had meddled in our elections on social media. This CIA memo in January 2017 ultimately produced the censorship industry architecture that we now live under, because the idea that the Russians had interfered in our election on social media, thanks to the CIA's essentially rubber stamping that as the official story, allowed the CIA and the FBI and DHS and other military and intelligence folks to saturate and descend on the social media companies like a swarm of vultures. And they very quickly transitioned from stopping Russian disinformation to stopping domestic mis and disinformation, i.e. anything true that the military or intelligence state does not want you to believe.
You know, it's incredible when you look at it over that canvas of time. George H.W. Bush, director of the CIA, Bill Barr. I mean, his career is basically based on the foundation. All of his achievements are basically about protecting the agency that he obviously dearly loved, and which reciprocated by protecting him throughout. as you say, the idea that George H.W. Bush, Bill Barr have these careers that are intertwined. It certainly is. It's symbiotic with any other definition would work, but symbiotic seems to work best. To think that the American people really didn't know what was going on because the national mainstream media wasn't speaking, because much of the mainstream media in those days was made up of CIA, FBI acolytes, all worshiping at the altar of national security, and whatever that meant was just fine with them. It is to me remarkable that Bill Barr has to this day gotten away with that job, as you call it, and it's apt. The janitor for the CIA in particular, he didn't do a bad job at the Department of Justice either, did he?
No, of course. I mean, the whole, think about the Hunter Biden case that's going on right now. There were 170 other crimes that Hunter Biden can be and could have been charged for, but most of them, the statute of limitations were let lapse, even though the FBI had the laptop while the statute of limitations was in play, i.e. Bill Barr had the laptop, had the knowledge of the crimes. They were actually monitoring the whole time. This is how we know about Hunter Biden setting up his father, Joe Biden, with the meeting with Xi and others in China. And Bill Barr covered up the Hunter Biden situation. And this is, as I've said before, it's my very strong opinion that Hunter Biden is protected because he was advancing a CIA operation in Ukraine, i.e. a State Department objective delegated to the CIA to get done in a covert and plausibly deniable way. But going back to the timeline that you laid out, it's really been something like 40 years since the American people have even really had a choice between a presidential contest with somebody who's not connected to the U.S. foreign policy establishment or the CIA. And again, I actually see the CIA as sort of a small player in this, because what you're really dealing with here is the Pentagon and the State Department, who they don't have a license to lie. They have to report to Congress. The CIA is the black box. They have the doctrine of plausible deniability to cloak them. So when the State Department or the DOD wants to get a dirty job done, what they do is they then task the CIA with doing it, but then tell the CIA, don't tell us how you're going to get it done, just get it done, and essentially compartmentalize the operations so that any manner of dirty deeds can be achieved, and Congress can't know about it, the president can't know about it effectively, the American people can't know about it, because the CIA is effectively tasked with not informing the State Department of the specific means that they use, to get that done, i.e. the sort of parameters of the operation are tasked with the CIA, and then these dirty deeds using money laundering or narco trafficking or paramilitary support are effectively left to the CIA's means. But what you're really dealing with here is the CIA is kind of a corrupt branch of a very rotted, corrupted tree. And it's those deep roots within the National Security Council, within the State Department, the DOD that we're talking about. But it is interesting that if you just look at the scope of the past 40 years of who you've had a choice to choose from between, in the pre-Trump era, Barack Obama has a very interesting history, for example, with the intelligence community. His mother was working with USAID in Indonesia. USAID is sort of the classic CIA front. It was set up in 1961 to coordinate the aid that the CIA, the State Department, and DOD were all giving for their own operations.
Mike, let me interrupt just for a second, because that is too good of a tease for what we're about to talk about. We're talking with Mike Benz, and as you can tell, knowledgeable and fascinating fellow with a lot of insight into intelligence, the military-industrial complex. So we're just going to wait just for a moment.
So we're looking at different groups out there. If you go to InfoWars to get info for the InfoWars, right? And Alex Jones doesn't know truly how it's going to turn out at the end of this, right? But he's just calling for the fight, right? But how it's all going to roll down and how all of his federal FBI controllers are going to ultimately, how things are going to break down for him, who knows, right? He doesn't know. He's just out there like fomenting this stuff. Right, he's right. All the white papers, all the documentation, all the information, a lot of what he's talking about is true. But they're ultimately going to hide the fundamental reality that the power players behind this protected agency of the Roman Catholics, right? The Vatican Empire worldwide, outposts near you, right? The Jesuit universities, how many? 36 of them? How many? I mean, just, it's a rough guess. How many universities, high-end, high-level universities and law schools and stuff they control here in the United States? So don't tell me about the Jews, guys. Don't tell me about your weird low-level reptilian UFO theories and stuff and about the Jews. It's so vomitous. It's so sickening to hear you guys discuss that. Of course, I don't like the undue influence of any lobbyists up in Washington, D.C. I'm against that. I'm against these guys pouring out money to the Democrats and the Republicans who are just like, with their uncontrolled avarice and greed, they're just like these little political fiends, right? And then they make laws that hurt the American people. I'm against all that. But don't sit there and denigrate the entire Jewish people across the board because you think that there's political shenanigans happening up with lobbyists up in Washington, D.C. from Israel or something, right? So you anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish people, you're un-Christian. And so it doesn't matter if you have a Christmas tree or a Santa, you're anti-Christian. And I have criticisms of Netanyahu, you know that. And I always wondered before they even made like an enormous, sprawling villainy story out of this idea that, like, why were these guys running all over the countryside shooting people, gunning people? They were making videos themselves. I mean, it wasn't like we had to go and have some kind of insider reporting. They had their own, like, embedded journalists, like, filming their activities. They shot people. I mean, we all saw the footage of these kind of the random Israeli people going around their normal business, and all of a sudden they're just getting killed everywhere they go. And so how did this go on and on and on for hours without there being some kind of response? You know, there were some heroic responses. There's some IDF soldiers off duty who got guns and who gunned these guys down, who responded correctly. But where's the police? Like, you know, what's the idea there? You know, so, you know, this idea that somehow there could have been people there that just pulled back and allowed it to happen in the government. Hey, man, I could totally buy that. I totally could even conceive of that. Like, I have that same issue with my own government here because I think that they basically, you know, to whatever degree of calculation that we need to put together a very sophisticated puzzle of 9/11 where that you can see there's all these moving parts and this plan, this kind of old plan to rally support against the communists by flying planes into the buildings. They took that to a whole other level.
The nature of war. I want to do nature of war first, and I want to get to Ukraine and other hotspots. Nature of war, not just by drones, but AI, drones, and other technologies.
Look, what happened in Ukraine, the necessity of innovation that smart Ukrainians did in their garages by improvising small drones with a charge that they were attaching to it or carrying an RPG, being able to fly that into a tank. Now, even in a high electronic warfare jammed environment, has been the single greatest adaptation change of weaponry, I would say, since you went from spears and longbows to muskets.
Wow, that big a deal.
Oh,
Go back to some Gulf War changed everything with precision bombing, correct?
It was the first time that we really showed precision bombing because you know after World War II, the first strategic offset, like how are we going to outgun the Soviets, was nuclear weapons, tonnage.
Right.
Then the U.S. said we're going to do precision weapons, and you really saw that in 1991, and then especially in 2003, 4, 5.
In the Gulf War, and then later precision bombing, put it right on the target. The Schwarzkopf would have the things. Then, in fact, that's when unrestricted warfare. The Chinese Communist Party, those two brilliant colonels, the book starts off in the Gulf War saying, we may never have the technology to defeat the West. We have to have unrestricted political, economic warfare to destroy them from within because in all likelihood, they're too far advanced on us. Now, cut to the dawning of this new age, because the Ukrainians are obviously very entrepreneurial, right? But it's about the technology and the ability even to do it. That's why when Rumsfeld talked about the revolution in military affairs, yes, that on September 10th, on the eve, when he mentioned, hey, there's $2.3 trillion of assets we can't even find. Remember the ones that they've made people have made a very big deal about that. His thing was, and he said, the enemy we have of the United States security is within this building. He was saying it's the administrative state, the permanent state. And Rumsfeld said, my job is, because he didn't see a war on the horizon thanks to the intelligence services that happened the next day. That was supposed to be the revolution in military affairs, was to make the Marine Corps like the Marine Corps. They were going to shrink your army. Is going to be like the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps are going to be like the Special Forces. There was going to be dramatic cuts, a totally rethinking of the fleets. Now, cut to today. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the ability of cameras and added with precision weapons. We've seen in the Ukraine war something pretty startling, have we not?
You're seeing everything from very old school to the newest of the new school, right? You're seeing absolutely pointless slaughter of artillery duels.
Trench warfare.
Trench warfare.
You want to know what kind of crisis we're in? You want to know about the Praetorian Guard? Paul Sperry at Realco Investigations, also at the New York Post. Paul, walk me through. You've put up one of the most blockbuster stories and investigations I've seen in recent years. And you tie together this Clapper, 1620, and brother, it's up in our face right now in 2024. Walk our audience through what your investigation has unearthed.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. James Clapper, Mr. October Surprise. So Clapper not only manufactured fake Russian intelligence to help Biden before his first debate with Trump, but he also manufactured fake Russian intel to help Hillary before her first debate with Trump. And sure enough, she uses it to attack Trump in that debate. That was in St. Louis. Tarnished him as a Russian agent and a Putin stooge. So, in effect, both presidential debates, 2016-2020, were rigged against Trump by intelligence operatives. That's a possible harbinger of things to come in 2024. It remains to be seen if they'll try to run another influence op against Trump, especially now after Biden's disastrous performance last night.
Well, let me hang on. But that's why you're so important today on the show. I mean, Scott Jennings called it on CNN. We have a national security crisis upon us right now. Those intelligence apparatuses and the people in there know this. This is my point. The cover up on the first off, what is exactly happening with an informed? That guy last night can't be commander in chief. He can't have the combatant commanders report to him, particularly with the early stages of the kinetic part of the Third World War in the South China Sea, in the Straits of Taiwan, in Gaza, in the Red Sea, in eastern Ukraine. It's just it's not possible. So this scandal, you talk about 16 and 20. We have a crisis right now, and the people you finger are part of it, sir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, a potential 9/11 encore attack on the homeland. I mean, he's already let in ISIS cells, Al Qaeda cells. We need to get down on our hands and knees and pray that he's not the commander in chief if we get hit again like 9/11 right now.
Paul, you're the lead investigator in this area, but correct me if I'm wrong. In a true constitutional government, don't we have oversight of all this? Don't we have a House and Senate Intelligence Committee? Even if these people are deep state, don't we have a institutional structure to not allow this to happen? And why then is it continue to happen, sir?
Well, because they got away with it. I mean, they were saying that this was, and then Clapper in 2020, he did the same thing for Biden just three days before that 2020 debate between Trump and Biden in Nashville, when he issued the fake intel to discredit the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. And we now know from emails that he helped draft the letter and even wrote the key language. This is Clapper, the phrase about how it has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. That was all Clapper. And, the media picked up on that. That's what they seized on. And they hyped that. But, of course, there was no Russian information op. It was really an influence operation by Clapper and the CIA. They were the ones interfering in the election, not the Russians, which is outrageous. And, it wasn't foreign intelligence services. It was our own domestic intelligence services who were interfering, did the skullduggery. And no one's paid the price for what they did in 2016. So they felt they were free to do it again in 2020, and no one's paid the price for that either. And you can bet they'll try it again in 2024 in some capacity and beyond. And, until we're a full-blown banana republic.
Maybe there was some foundation damage in the first 9/11 attack that happened in 2000, and it was in 1999, 2000, when the FBI gave the terrorists a real bomb, and they went up there and they blew up the World Trade Center's parking lot. Maybe there was some major foundational damage to the buildings, and they just had to take them down. And it's such a huge insurance risk. Maybe it made more sense just to take the buildings down, right? And then have you get a couple guys killed, everyone's mostly out, right? And then building 7, that just goes down too, right? They used to have all the FBI and CIA command centers, offices in there. And it just falls down, right? So, I don't put it past governments and people, power pigs within governments, super rich, to sacrifice people in order to roll an agenda along. I got that. But that's got nothing to do with hating the entire body of the Jewish people across the face of the earth, and then allowing people on your platform who do that, right? Who use some of these questions and suspicions and issues that we have with our governments to castigate. Like, I have a problem with 9/11, but that doesn't make me hate all Cherokee Indians everywhere. Like, it's totally insane, right? I mean, I think that there were certain actors in the government who allowed it to happen. They were suspicious. Everyone else was unaware. That's the same issue that we have in all governments, everywhere you look. So you're promoting and allowing these anti-Jew, anti-Semitic Jew haters on your platforms, who are just like low-key like Hamas supporters in the background, right? Because they're so weak and facile and, like, invertebrates in the first place, that they will be attracted to, ISIS-type beheadings and stuff like that. That kind of like pornographic violence is something they would be attracted to, because they're just worms, right? These are people that just laid around on soft couches and pillows their whole lives, up in college classrooms, going through the banality of, supposed information, and history is where the war is at. Information is information. Information could go, could be right, information could be wrong. The signal you get could be the right signal, or it could be the wrong signal. What is important here is the historical storyline and the epigraphical narration of the actual context of the fight that we're in, and why we're doing what we're doing, why we're aiming our muskets in one particular direction or another. Why did George Washington go down with his cannons on Christmas night and blow up the British in the harbor on the ships when they were all partying and having Christmas Eve parties and all that? And he went down there and lit their ass up, shot and just killed lots of them. I think that we have to begin to understand our history for what it is, rather than what these other individuals, disinformation weaklings, are putting out. Disinformation weaklings, that's working. So I like everything these guys are saying, because that's how it works when they're propagandists. And look at these InfoWars antagonists. They're just sitting up there and their big old propaganda. InfoWars is going to be shut down. And it's funny, they're always teasing, it's never going to be shut down. It's just the gimmick they go through. And look, I'm behind putting out the information. But I'm not going to sit here and coddle my own biases, at the expense of everyone else I'm listening to. The idea is to get at the fundamental truth of the reality of the thing. We have to be able to look past what we understand the issues to be. And when you look at Infowars.com and these Alex Jones show and all that, it's just completely drenched and draped with anti-Jew hate. It's not really relevant or practically applying to the circumstances across the board. They're not going to go in there and have criticisms of the things that they're backing, right? The things they like. They're not going to criticize Roman Catholicism to any degree. They're not going to criticize papal knights, right? And they're not going to criticize the forces behind World War II that allowed Hitler to go into power and all that, right? You don't hear any discussion about Skull and Bones, 322. Right? All those groups and the Illuminati, they're all controlled by Jews. That's the info. That's the info you get on these disinformation fairies, these different disinformation weaklings over here. So we can't really say enough about that, about how disappointing it is to really go to the core of the matter with these guys, and they're just constantly selling you the supplements for 10-minute long commercials. And they just give you this like deep state double cross narrative. I guess we're not the triple X now, right? Let's see. We're not going to do X2 anymore, because that's too much like a double cross. It'll be an X3 snake oil that they got out there for us. And so I think that you'll see over the course of time, they have Rodney Howard Brown on the other associations with Christian-like thinkers and ideas out there. But when it comes down to the fundamental core of the matter, when it comes down to being like Christ, to being like the man from Nazareth, right? He was born in Bethlehem in a manger. That guy. The wise men showed up. They had been traveling for over a year, maybe 2 years, to show up on a given night because they were led by astrological signs right in the sky, and the wise men were led there to leave these tremendous gifts of incense, myrrh, and gold. Right? They knew what was going on. They could at least respect it. But these guys here, they have gone to such a deep level of self-delusion at this point, right? Totally self-deluded. And then they get on, in order to have some kind of context for Christianity, they bring on, they bring on the dire replacement theology, right? To come on there and just to go on and on and on about this highfalutin super spiritual ideas from ancient writers like Polycarp, right? And so they bring these nerds out, and so that's how they address Christianity in some other contexts where, you know, it's other than the Santa and the Easter Bunny and all that. But of course, you have to look at it for what it is. You have to recognize that these Republicans and these Democrats are both drinking at the well of Rome and the influence of the Vatican. It's extreme. It's intense. You can see that the Zionists who went to a great extent to ultimately set up Israel had to go and supplicate before the Pope and Theodore Herzl. I'm not an expert on a lot of this stuff, but a lot of these guys had to go there and just supplicate at the Vatican, be associated there, disappointingly, to get their way, to get, you know, right? And so all these little, they're like little Zelenskys, right? They have their little they've been inflamed with their political cause and their like myopic, small view, world vision. And then they're used like clones. You can see like Zelensky's totally addicted to cocaine, like a fiend, like a total crackhead fiend. He must have hung out with Hunter Biden a few times at Pedophile Island or whatever. And so all these degenerates are just totally disgusting, subhuman animals, right? And we, the American people, we are harboring the actual heart and the spirit of humanity within us, right? That's why he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. And so this spirit that we have is the regular masses, the populations that are subjected to depop poisoning, depop vaccines, like depop policies, depopulation thinking in the classroom, right? We're the ones who ultimately have got to survive. We've got to be the regular natural human beings, right? We're not going to become the transhumans. We're not going to incubate our babies in like test tubes, right? We're not going to abort our children. We're not going to stop eating hamburgers so we can eat bugs, right? We're going to be the natural humans. We're the original Americans. And so as they advance into their weird technotronic archipelago, or whatever it is that they're going to this breakaway society of fanatics and globalists who really think that the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and the World Health Organization, they really think that those things are really like banging, like really important, really meaningful in the world, right? And they're going to really have an effect. And they're going to have lasting control over the globe in the future. So you can see that we have to continuously struggle. And, you know, it was a long time before I could really see the architecture of this plan in America. We're blinded to it. Many people are not. You know, many people are kind of awake to it. I remember thinking that some of these guys had these really intense, you know, racial theories and all this stuff, and that Americans could never be descended in such a low level of ignorance to be imbibed with that. Or, you know, it's into the flat earth thing, right? I just never could imagine that people could be so duped or so easy, you know, whoever's like preaching that, right, whatever kind of like weird trolls are out there getting a boner over convincing other people it's true, just to like mess with them, or I don't know, I can't imagine what goes on, right? There's just so many people out there doing so many different things. It's incomprehensible to me that people would be duped into like this stupidity. And you can see it's going to be continuous from here on out, and that you can convince people of anything, right? And we have a lot of questions. We have questions about the moon landing hoax. Right? It seems clear to me that was completely total, you know, CIA psyop, you know, Stanley Kubrick filming, a genius filming job, basically, behind the scenes. And I heard a lot of it was done in London, so, you know, England somewhere, some Air Force base in England. So look, this whole process of learning how to control what people hear, see, and think, and put them in a little psychological box. I've seen it on the tube, right? And you look at the picture tube of what they actually saw, right? You know what I mean? With the old Zenith or whatever the hell, 1969. Right? You know damn well that if they could pop in there and drop down there with a little rover golf cart, go play golf on there whenever they wanted, they would already have hotels there. And so part of the brainwash coming out of Hollywood with Ad Astra, movies like that Brad Pitt was in, is just kind of reinforcing this idea that we've been there, that somehow we can easily go there and just do, you know, ride around the moon whenever we want, right? With this kind of AI generated film footage, CGI Hollywood magic. Here, give this to your mom. That reinforces, you know, of course they're going to go and tell you, of course the CIA is all involved with the film studios. What do you think the images, just like the Chinese or the CCP is trying to do now, little by little, they're trying to enforce this worldview that humors them, right? That takes into consideration everything that they wanted to say and do and speak about, and how they want the Chinese Communist Party to be recognized or visualized within movies, etc., etc. John Cena gets down on his knees and he kisses the ring, the rock, They all kiss the ring of the CCP in order to make movies in Hollywood now. Of course, we all know it. We have to stop watching the movies. We have to start doing everything we can to despise and ridicule and just basically push them out of the thought space, the marketplace of ideas. Right? We got to get rid of them. Same thing we have to do to these other agencies and institutions in America. Right? We have to be responsible as the American people.
Back, we're talking with Mike Benz, and Mike, you were saying about. Let me tease this out a bit for our audience. You were saying about President Obama's mother, her relationship to the intelligence community and dark forces that work around the globe.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, sort of the origins of Barack Obama and his political career. A lot of folks know that he sort of comes from that Chicagoland. Penny Pritzker was a big backer of his career. The Pritzkers are sort of all over the intelligence world and commerce and politics. And J.B. Pritzker is currently the governor of Illinois. But before that, his origin story itself is quite interesting. Before his time at Harvard Law, so his mother, Ann Dunham. I'll just read a few things. Just you can find in a simple Google search if you just put in Obama's mother. USAID. Now, USAID, she was formerly, his mother worked for USAID. Now, USAID is the classic CIA financial front. It was set up in 1961 in order to coordinate all of the logistical, financial, and support aid that the CIA, the Pentagon, and the State Department were all running to their different proxies in different countries. So they were stepping over each other. That is, we wanted to, the CIA wanted to run arms to a CIA-backed paramilitary in one place. The military wanted to run food to a military group they were backing on one side of a war. The State Department wanted to run resources to a group that was getting State Department grants, and all this aid was tripping over itself. And so they centralized it all in the form of USAID. And USAID is not a charity. Okay, it's a soft power projection mechanism. That is, anytime USAID gives out money, it has to be to advance a U.S. foreign policy goal, which is the same mandate the CIA has, just as the State Department does. And so Obama's mother, Ann Dunham, worked for USAID in the 1960s. This is right ahead of the Church Committee hearings in the 60s and 70s. She was working specifically for a long time on Indonesia, exactly when the CIA was conducting a regime change operation in Indonesia. She also worked as a consultant for the Ford Foundation, which was busted at that time. While she was working at the Ford Foundation later came up as one of the marquee foundations that the CIA was using as a pass-through for CIA money laundering operations. You can watch a 1967 CBS special called In the Pay of the CIA, which goes through the Ford Foundation's role as a CIA conduit at the exact time his mother was working there. Also, we worked at the Asia Foundation, which was later unveiled as a CIA front. Also for Development Alternatives, Inc., which was a company that specialized in providing cover for CIA employees. Also at the East West Center of Hawaii, which has also been dogged by the same allegations as the Asia Foundation. This is essentially for work that we were doing in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia. And so you have this history where the mother is working for a CIA front, is a consultant for four entities, all either discovered to be or alleged to be CIA fronts. And then he's catapulted into Harvard, despite us not knowing his academic record and apparently being on drugs for a fair amount of the time. And then he's immediately picked up by the Saul Alinsky Network in Chicago. And then from there, he's immediately vaulted into political power by the Pritzkers, who have 3 or 4 generations of work with the intelligence community, the mafia, and money laundering rings around hotels and casinos. And so, it's this nexus between the mob, the military, commerce, and justice, which is a story that we've seen 1,000 times in American politics. It's the same story essentially with Bill Barr, as we discussed. But this situation where you have people working their way through CIA families or CIA sort of legacy family connections or CIA incubators before they make their way to the presidency is something we've now been dealing with in this country for about 40 years. So we started by talking about Bill Barr and the Reagan administration in the 1980s.
Well, George H.W. Bush, who was vice president, then became president. And I mentioned that Bill Barr was the cover-up artist for Iran-Contra. He was the one who defended the CIA against Congress in Congress's request for documents about the Iran-Contra scandal, where the CIA was taking drugs from Colombia, flying it to Mena, Arkansas, converting it to cash, buying guns, and sending those guns back to the CIA-backed paramilitary Contra group. Well, who was the governor of Arkansas at the time when the CIA was running this operation? Anyone in the audience? Can you think about someone who started their career as they were Georgetown, Rhodes Scholar, Northeast, royalty, could have done anything, but instead goes back to the middle of Arkansas for their career and becomes state attorney general and then governor of the state of Arkansas. Who was Mr. Arkansas at the time when the CIA was running the Iran-Contra operation? It was Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton then goes on to be president, basically the guy who was assisting the CIA operation that Bill Barr was protecting. So it goes from Bill Clinton then to George Bush, George W. Bush, who of course was the governor of Texas, but also the son of the former CIA director and president George H.W. Bush. Who does George Bush run against for president in 2004? John Kerry. Well, how did John Kerry get started in his career? Well, when he was a senator, he was the one who wrote the report, the whitewash report on the CIA's role in Iran-Contra. You can look up something called the John Kerry report, called the Kerry report. He was supposed to be the one to get to the bottom of CIA malfeasance in Iran-Contra, the operation that Bill Clinton was hosting in Arkansas and that the Republican CIA was carrying out to get around Congress under George Bush, that Bill Barr covered up. So CIA versus CIA, essentially. And of course, John Kerry would go on to be the Secretary of State after Hillary Clinton in 2014, when Hillary Clinton was making her run for the presidential election contest in 2016. Now, of course, the State Department is the big daddy over the CIA. As I said, the CIA is sort of the black box that the State Department gives the dirty deeds to. That way, the State Department objective can get done, but Congress and the president don't get to know how it was done. They don't, and any investigation into how it gets done gets covered up because the CIA then intermediates with the Justice Department to protect the criminal elements of the operation. So then you have the 2008 presidential contest, where it was Barack Obama versus John McCain. Well, where did John McCain come from? How did he get his rise to power? Well, in 1983, as Bill Barr was doing his mop-up work for the CIA had just endured this brutal public beatdown from the Democrats because of all their domestic meddling in elections and domestic meddling in politics in the 60s and 70s. And so Jimmy Carter effectively neutered a large portion of CIA operations. He did something that was called the Halloween Massacre, where he laid off 30% of the operations division of the CIA in a single night. So the CIA hated Jimmy Carter, and they hated the Democrats at the time who were putting caps on CIA activity. So what the CIA director in 1983, William Colby, did. William Colby would then die of a mysterious boating accident near his own home that is still unsolved to this day. But the CIA director, William Colby, then wrote a letter to the Attorney General of the United States. So the CIA wrote a letter to the Justice Department calling for the establishment of a brand new tool called the National Endowment for Democracy. And the reason that the CIA wanted to set up a National Endowment for Democracy was so that when the CIA operations were discovered in the country, it would not be traceable to the CIA. There would be a nonprofit promoting democracy that would be the CIA intermediary, but it wouldn't look like the CIA was doing it. It would look like an NGO was doing it. Okay, that's literally the almost verbatim language. If you just look up William Colby's letter on the National Endowment for Democracy, this is what was created. And the National Endowment for Democracy was given two initial branches. One of them was called the IRI, the International Republican Institute. That was for Republican CIA oversight officials and Republican CIA stakeholders. And the other one was called the NDI, the National Democratic Institute, which was for Democrat CIA folks and Democrat CIA oversight folks and Democrat CIA stakeholders. Who founded the IRI, the International Republican Institute, the RNC branch of the CIA? John McCain. And John McCain served as the head of the IRI, the head of the CIA branch of the GOP for 25 years. Until his run for president against Barack Obama, John McCain was in charge of the CIA side of the GOP. You know who's on the board of the IRI? Mitt Romney, the guy who would then represent the Republicans in the 2012 presidential contest. And this gets us to today. And I'll just conclude by saying, and who was on the chairman's advisory board of the NDI, the DNC CIA branch, Hunter Biden.
Hunter Biden. Oh my gosh. We're coming right back with Mike Benz, and it only gets better from here, folks.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust, and their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back with Mike Benz, and he is taking us down the rabbit hole. This is the big-time rabbit hole. We're talking about the influence of the CIA, the intelligence community, aligned with both political parties. And when last we were speaking a minute or so ago, you said, who is the head of the Democratic arm? Hunter Biden? Did I hear you correctly?
Well, he was on the chairman's advisory committee of the NDI. And as I mentioned, NDI was set up by the CIA director in 1983, William Colby, who wrote the letter to the head of the Justice Department about the need to establish the National Endowment for Democracy, which NDI is the DNC branch of. And then President Ronald Reagan passed that bill establishing the National Endowment for Democracy, which gets virtually all of its funding from the U.S. taxpayers. It is technically an independent, non-governmental organization, but its money all comes from U.S. taxpayers, and it has to report to Congress, unlike almost all NGOs. It is sort of like USAID, but dirtier. And USAID is formally a public agency. Oftentimes, the way things are structured is the State Department has a foreign policy goal said to be in U.S. national interest. It will then get USAID to provide it'll task essentially the CIA on providing covert or plausibly deniable support for that U.S. foreign policy goal. And the State Department on the overt side and the CIA on the covert side will then work with USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy in order to do the logistics, in order to get the media on board the operation, in order to get the unions on board the operation, in order to get the politicians in the region on board the operation, in order to get the banks and the private sector co-partners. And so Hunter Biden, you don't get on the chairman's advisory board of the CIA's most prolific cutout, of the tens of thousands of CIA cutouts around the world. The National Endowment for Democracy is bar none the big daddy of them all. You don't get to be on the chairman's advisory board of the NDI unless you are vetted by intelligence. Now, of course, Hunter Biden's whole world was running through intelligence at that point. He was doing business. One of his clients was the head of Chinese intelligence as he was selling them LNG ports, American LNG ports in Louisiana. And as his whole operation in Ukraine was running through several other State Department or CIA intermediated activities. The whole metabiota situation where what you're dealing with here are essentially it's a biosecurity matter that's going to have military and intelligence vetting. And then, of course, you have Burisma. And I think as we've covered before, the State Department had an in-process operation called energy diversification or energy security or energy diplomacy. It goes by different names, which is a project to pry Russian gas off of Russia and replace it with a combination of Houston LNG and endogenous gas supply mined from shale in the Donbass and in the Black Sea Crimea region. It was Burisma who held the mining rights to those. And that is why, by the way, John Solomon did a great, let me just finish this is one thing here. Sure. John Solomon broke an incredible story about a week ago, which was a 53-page memo that Hunter Biden's law firm pitched for in order to get out of the state prosecution by Victor Shokin, the same prosecutor who Joe Biden bragged to the Council on Foreign Relations that he bribed for $1 billion to get the Ukrainian state to remove. Before Joe Biden stepped in, Hunter Biden's law firm wrote a memo where they strategized in the memo that they would submit a pitch to the State Department that Burisma's continued operations and their business license and their protection against the Ukrainian prosecutor was vital to U.S. national interests. Now, that is a catchphrase. That is a watchword. Vital to U.S. national interests means it's a State Department operation now. And that means it's a CIA operations now, because again, the CIA is just the support arm for the State Department. In a lot of ways, the CIA is not actually a rogue agency. It is rogue, but it's the rogue arm of a rogue brain inside state. So if State Department agreed with that pitch, then this is something the House Foreign Affairs Committee can get on top of right now if they want to hold a hearing and investigation into just get all State Department and CIA documents using that keyword Burisma. And you can break this whole thing out in the open right now if there's the political will to do it. If the State Department accepted that pitch from Hunter Biden's law firm, that Burisma was indeed vital to U.S. national interests because of its role in propping up Ukraine's gas market and prying Russia out, then that would have given a green light to the Central Intelligence Agency to rig the internal politics of Ukraine to make that happen. While Hunter Biden, from the CIA cutout, National Endowment for Democracy, was on Burisma's board, and while right next to him on the board of Burisma was Cofer Black, who spent 30 years in the Directorate of Operations of the CIA and even won a CIA medal for doing it.
And close to, without any question, Senator Mitt Romney. And we can spin back into the Clintons. We can go back through the travails in Arkansas. This is a web spun wide and secure. And we appreciate, Mike, you introducing us to these new realities. For us, they're new. For most of America, I would guess, there's not even been a conspiracy theory around much of this. We know, by the way, that there were conspiracy theories about the Clintons in Arkansas. And, you know, like so many conspiracy theories today, all of them have proved true.
Well, if you don't want conspiracy theories, how about we get rid of conspiracy agencies? How about we get rid of the plausible deniability doctrine? Then you don't need to worry about this anymore. And let me just say one last thing, which is that I applaud Jim Jordan for finally taking this issue up. The last thing that we were talking about just now with Hunter Biden and his role on the CIA cutout and NED, it's important to keep in mind that the CIA publicly, we know this publicly from Jim Jordan's weaponization subcommittee, that the CIA waived the Justice Department off of interviewing the man who paid Hunter Biden's taxes. That is the guy, he was 5 years or whatever delinquent on his taxes. And yes, exactly. He was waived off. I don't know if any of your friends have ever paid your taxes before, but this would be classic money laundering protection if this was the case. But Jim Jordan has finally sent a letter to the CIA demanding a briefing on why they waived the Justice Department off of Hunter Biden's sugar daddy. And I hope he's listening to this broadcast or that it can be forwarded to him, because all he needs to do is walk right next door to the House Foreign Affairs Committee or the House Intelligence Committee and get all CIA records on Burisma and Naftogaz, the big gas giants there, and all CIA analyst memos that make reference to Burisma or Naftogaz or the natural gas market there. And that will give you the answer as to why Hunter Biden has been protected for so long.
Mike Benz, a fascinating tale. We appreciate your being our guide through it all, and what a thicket it is to get through. I guess the headline might be that Donald Trump has so much trouble now because unlike all the other candidates who've been chosen by the CIA, President Trump was not. And shame on him. That was quite an omission. We'll take up more of that in the days and weeks ahead. Mike, we really appreciate your time on this, and thank you for being our Sherpa through all of this and introducing us to realities that we hardly knew existed. So again, Mike Benz, as always, our thanks. We appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you, Lou. Talk soon.
And we have to recognize and see when the circumstance requires us to act in unison, think in unison, and have our political will enacted. And we have to go after some of these rogue agencies. This FBI, this American Gestapo, has got to be put out of existence. It's not constitutional. It doesn't exist in any state constitutional law, it doesn't have anything to do with the fabric of American constitutional existence, right? Whatever life it's been given, whatever legal standing that it's been given to do all the things that it's doing by executive proclamation, executive order, whatnot, it has to just be undone. And all those individuals up there, I mean, for whatever they should be doing, right? I guess whatever actual crimes that they've solved or people's lives they've saved, right? We need to end up shattering those institutions into 1,000 pieces. That's what JFK decided he would do with the CIA. And of course, later on, you would have George Bush, the senior, come out, skull and bones boy, right? Bootlicker of the Pope, come out and ultimately say, we're going to create 1,000 points of light. 1,000 points of light, blah, blah, blah. Right? That was their response to, the Jesuit response to shattering the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Of course, if you think about 1,000 points of light, it doesn't make me think, when I think about 1,000 points of light, it makes me visualize a bright, flashing Illuminati blaze, right? It makes me think of the Jesuit logo. Go look at the Jesuit logo, IHS. You just see a big sun blaze. Right? That's what I think of when I think of 1,000 points of light. These are just sun-worshipping, devil worshippers and demon worshippers. And that's all the Vatican has ever been. It's been the establishment of the system of the Antichrist, which has made war on all the Christians throughout all time and throughout all history since the time of Christ. If Imperial Rome, with its insane and sick, perverted Caesars, which means I'm talking about the Pontifex Maximus, right? This is pre-Pope Pontifex Maximus, of the Caesars, if they weren't insanely persecuting the Christians of Jesus Christ throughout Jerusalem and throughout the world and everywhere, Antioch, and burning them alive and putting them in to be a spectacle before the masses and to be fed to the lions, etc. Then later on, after the time of Constantine, you would have the papal Caesars, the popes, persecute Christians all throughout the world. The Waldensians, right, were just almost extinguished out of existence by papal armies, and that particular group, widely reflected as the Albigensians, were Christians throughout the Alps who were murdered and entirely extinguished out of the history books, so there was no record left of them at all. They not only were murdered, but they were murdered out of history. So you have to go to other libraries outside Western civilization to find out about the Albigensians. And it goes all throughout history. We go into France and we look at the Huguenots. The Huguenots were persecuted mercilessly. Look at the Inquisitions, the Roman Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, the Inquisitions all across Europe. Wherever these psychos from the Vatican could get a foothold in, they would butcher true Bible believers. They made the Bible itself an illegal object. You couldn't possess it. It was on the index of burned books, of banned books. So you weren't allowed to possess the Bible. That's why the King James Bible, 1611, is so important, because they had it published verbatim in perfect literary translation as best they could. There's issues there, but they did it as a political act of violence and reaction, war against the ideological control that the Vatican had over the minds of men and over the world. And so now everyone could hold and contain and carry and read the words of God for themselves, and it takes away the power of these priests to conduct their papal magic, their sacrifices unto demons. That's what you're looking at. You can't share bread with a demon and with God. You can't share the cup of communion with demons and with God, guys. There is no special communion. That's what these Orthodox and these papists in Rome, that's what they all got wrong. They're trying to ordinate some kind of special communion celebration of Christianity as their presuppositions allow. And we know that we look at the original writings of Jesus Christ and the original Gospels, that he didn't have some kind of Holy Communion. He was participating in the Jewish Passover Seder. So this meal, this magical meal of the false replacement theology Christians, this magical meal of Jesus, the Holy Supper, the Last Supper, the Holy Communion, right? That they're all waving around the little wafer and all that. The priest does it, and the holy magic goes up, and all of a sudden, all of your sins are released from you, or whatever. This poppycock, this idolatry of vanity, this is what we're calling out. This is why disinfo war slackers and nerds over there can never really understand it, because they don't listen to the Lord. When you look at the Gospels, Jesus said, I am the shepherd and my sheep hear my voice. They're not hearing the voice, guys. They're participating in the background. It's just a political movement to them. Right? It's just a color revolution. It's just a move of society. But it doesn't really it isn't truly meaningful to them in their depths. Right? They're just trying to sell you the vitamin elixir. Right? That's it. And then they're just trade and traffic and rumors of the truth back and forth. Like, it's funny to listen to Alex Jones ride the truth. I don't hate them and I don't hate them. I don't support them and I don't support them. Right? What the hell? Bunch of cucks, man. Tough guys. They'll fight you in the bar or whatever, but when it comes down to standing up for the truth, I don't support that truth and I don't support that truth. I don't support anything. Just come here and buy the elixir. So it's pathetic, man. It's just as revealing to me now and to all of us, right? And it just becomes this mechanism for the tropes, right? All the anti-Jewish haters out there are just glommed on the messaging boards. Let's go in there and look, right? It's this point of anti-Jew hate where the extreme right and the extreme left connect. It's where the Vatican and Islam come together. They agree on this one thing, right? And this is where you're going to get all they're just Khazarians, right? And you're going to get this worldwide persecution against Jews. That's what you're going to see here, and that's when they're going to provoke the Lord, right? So let them go on with their anti-Jew hate, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel. We're just criticizing the government. Go ahead, man, criticize the government, but criticize all the other governments equally. Like don't be such an anti-Semitic government criticizer, right? You guys are idiots. You're sitting at home, you're a bunch of flat earth morons, and you've never even been out of the United States. I'll bet $1 million right now, you idiots on there with the flat earth thing have never been out of the United States, right? I make awnings for a living. Whoa, bro. Whoa, I'll beat your ass. All right, that's badass and tough. But you're still a flat earth, anti-Jew. You're just a flat earther, anti-Semitic Jew hater in the end. That's it. Right, and so you don't have any, and I guess go pull the lever for Donald Trump because I guess we need your vote. But other than that, bro, like you guys here in the United States have been so demoralized, and this information war and the psyop against you has been so successful that they've damaged intellectual rigor for 100 years. That's right. It's now time for a word from our awesome sponsor, Wendy's Boutique Limited. Wendy'sLimited.com. And Wendy'sLimited.com is offering the hottest new designer trends and brand name couture fashion styles. So you have to hear about Wendy's Boutique. Wendy'sLimited.com. Wendy'sLimited.com now has designer women's apparel and fine jewelry, sexy boutique fashions, very best prices online. And you know that at Wendy'sLimited.com, they know what a woman is, what a woman really is, right? So if you're a beautiful woman, or if you know a beautiful woman, and if you don't, stop listening to this show, okay? Right now, just stop. But if you happen to know a beautiful woman, and you are a beautiful woman, you have to know about Wendy'sLimited.com. So these are the sexiest boutique fashions anywhere, very best prices online, beautiful luxury products, guaranteed authentic, guaranteed, no Chinese knockoffs ever. So this is the real deal. This is the real, the legit, best prices, hottest couture gear, fragrances. We had Tom Ford shades, great deal on the Tom Ford shades. Everybody loves Tom Ford shades. So you can expect to find Gucci apparel, Hermes shoes, Prada jewelry, all at Wendy'sLimited.com. And you got to remember, Wendy'sLimited.com is really now famous for canceling Balenciaga when it mattered, right? So we're not having any of that over here. This is a woman-owned enterprise, all-American, family-run organization. Wendy'sLimited.com. Wendy'sLimited.com. You got to come join the craze. Hottest new designer trends, guys. Wendy's Boutique Limited. We need your support. And she's been courageous to support the show. Wendy'sLimited.com. So let us just be redirected once again to the subject matter at hand. Namely, it's this coordinated conspiracy, deeply intricate, long-term conspiracy, right, to ultimately debase our justice system so that you can hear Mark Levin talk about it all the time. It's our injustice department. And by getting a hold of these, more than institutions, but these centrifuges of power within our constitutional democracy, they can ultimately deface, demoralize, and denigrate the foundations and the framework for our moral and just society, and ultimately turn those things on their head. And that's what you're seeing now in the world in the most deranged and hyper-focused way. So that some of these instances in the courts where the indecency and arbitrary tyranny of these courts that are completely unmoored from any constitutional standing, right? So that these courts ultimately are supposed to be constitutional courts. They're supposed to be limited and delimited and hedged in their jurisprudence by constitutional boundaries. But these courts that we're talking about now are just centers of ideologues of the extreme left, of one stripe or another, and the minutiae of their particular victimology and the particular standpoint of their hermeneutic by which they excoriate modern society for one reason or another, and they huff glue in the parks and wear like trash can lids as shields with the Antifa activists, etc. They all become one marshaled, writhing horde of chaos, right? And these same ideological extremists have got into the halls of power and the DOJ. And so you can see that Merrick Garland goes up to Congress and completely lies, in my humble opinion, commits this extreme kind of contempt of Congress and hides the fact that Michael Colangelo came from his office and now is like the assistant of the jackass DA down in low-level New York City to be Alvin Bragg's cup holder, right? And of course, Merrick Garland's going to say, I've got nothing to do with that. And I said, and look at Jack Smith, totally unconfirmed by the Senate, totally illegitimate, case falling apart. But they're like rabid. They're fueled by this rabid, intense, fundamentalist political ideology. And those are just the rails that they're rolling on. But really, the gas burning in the engine here is fear and terror at the exposure and at the swinging of this pendulum now is crashing through the walls. And the legacy of these deep state sycophants and power worms up there, it's all coming apart, right? Mitch McConnell, Cocaine Mitch, right, had the wife's sister like die in the Tesla incident where the Tesla just locks itself and backs itself into the lake or whatever body of water and just drowns you. Whoops. So we're seeing this gradual process of revealing the method, the revelation of the method, the process of showing us the instruments of our torment, right, of our torture, right, before they're used, as they're being used. And so you can see how deformed and degenerate these people are. They've been raised up for some time now, some decades perhaps, to be the puppets and the little pathetic, controlled and owned personas that they are, right? They're owned people. They're slaves. Alvin Bragg doesn't have the freedom or the liberty to wake up one morning and say, you know what, I think I made a mistake, right? I think I'm going to see reason. I think I'm going to look at this, right? This whole thing has taken on a life of its own and become the embodiment of its own catastrophic breakdown within the constitutional process is what they're trying to create. They're creating this fulcrum point and a leverage point and within this system of liberty and protected freedoms, and they're doing it on multiple platforms here. And all these headlines read to me like some kind of like neo-Civil War period. I go back and look at the headlines that were going on at the time, around the Lincoln presidency and stuff like that. The extremism here is getting so out of control that we'll see where these points of pressure are, where these guys really ultimately begin to pop, right? Where they're going to be whistleblowers, there's going to be people coming out of the woodwork, there's going to be individual extremists. Now you can see that, look at the president of the Bill and Hillary Clinton airport or something. Right, the executive director there, they just show up in he didn't get his paperwork, right? We talked about this. He didn't get all of his paperwork filled out properly, so they show up in the morning with a warrant and somehow shoot him in the face. Right, so it's all about that door. It's all about that door kick, guys. It's all about that. Who controls the door kickers, and who controls them deep in their mind, where they really believe what they're doing, right? And who are the paid mercenaries and killers, and the paid shooters, right? Everyone was looking at the video of that one woman cop on X. And she runs up to the guy, rips his door open, and just starts shooting her gun off and wants him to get out and surrender to her. And she doesn't want to be shot, right? These cops, they don't want to be shot, but they want to shoot the hell out of you at will. It's crazy. They're crazy. They're crazy, right? And then so now they got these uniformed power pigs going on, and they think that now, and they used to have actual like respectable, well-adjusted, well-trained individuals in those positions, but now they're going to get these jackasses. They'll get these Jordanians who are really secretly Hezbollah commanders riding around in the sheriff cruisers or whatever. I guess police. I guess it's the police. I guess the sheriffs wouldn't really suffer this, right? So we have issues, guys. We have imbalances. We have these terrible divergences in what is reality around here and what is really going on. So and who the bad guys are and who the heroes are. Just a huge reversal, right? Everything is to be reversed. Everything is the criminals are to be let loose again and again to rape and to murder. And again, they find a 12-year-old girl's dead body in the creek in Texas now, in Houston somewhere. And they're demonstrating the power of this system to roll back the tapes, guys, and roll back the footage and roll back all the digital transactions and all the phone information. All of us on our phones all the time. It's a whole lot of information now. They're able to roll it back pretty easily through this system of cameras and ATM footage and Ring videos they have, right? I mean, we can pretty much see what everyone is doing all the time, so you can't go and like commit a crime like what these people are committing without finding out in 12 hours who it is and being out their front door, even though they thought they went to some kind of great precautions to escape, right? Well, it looks like to me like we are being monitored at a high-level surveillance state at this point, and that is becoming more and more apparent. It's obvious when they got Peter Strzok's text messages to his lover, right? It's obvious that this system is coming online. And it's I think that's really what the cognition awareness programming is that's really taking place here in the background with AI and the idea that it's not directed by people to make all the human beings on Google AI to be black people or whatever. Right? I'm not really partaking in it that deeply at this point where I'm noticing some of that, but I hear about it, we're all hearing about it. And we can see that the revolution is here, and the revolution is for your mind. So you have to, guard your heart and then put on that helmet of salvation. That's what they call that. And you have to protect your mind. You have to understand where you're at. And if you don't have that helmet, your mind is totally exposed. And they could call it a tinfoil hat, but in the biblical context, we call it the armor of God. And the whole armor of God and et cetera. And if you don't know about that, you'll have to go take time to look that up for yourself.
I think essentially, if you were going to put a label on it, it would be the narrative is falling apart. The Democrats put up a narrative, and they've done it, since 2016. Their narrative was that Trump was an agent of Russia. That fell apart. Now the narrative was that Trump incited an insurrection. That now is falling apart. That Trump has committed all these crimes in office. That's falling apart. So the entire narrative against Trump is now falling apart, and I think it's a very good week for him, I think.
Oh, I'll tell you what, he's breathing easier as so many others that have had injustice thrown at them. So we will hear more. There was one, when I looked at the names, how they voted, the two I remember, and I assume the report was correct, but the article I read said that Amy Barrett, which, remember about a couple weeks ago, she says, I'm my own person.
Yeah.
she voted against this. Yeah, all the other more conservative justices. So she may have, sometimes she might have one point that you'd have a hard time arguing with. I don't know if that's true, but it was a surprise to me, especially when Katina Brown Jackson had a vote here a month or so ago that we were surprised.
Yeah.
And from our viewpoint, she deserves credit for that because she voted yes on this.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, Sean Davis, I think from the Federalist, if I'm not mistaken, he had a couple of interesting insights, and they appear in the Zero Hedge article. If you could just fast forward to the one that says key paragraph, I think it's 2 or 3 in, and put that one up. So key paragraph in the Supreme Court ruling, Dr. Paul, this is a quote from the decision. Taking into account these competing considerations, the court concludes that the separation of powers principles explicated in the court's precedent necessitate at least a presumptive immunity from criminal prosecution for a president's acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. Such an immunity is required to safeguard the independence and effective functioning of the executive branch, and to enable the president to carry out his constitutional duties without undue caution. At a minimum, the president must be immune from prosecution for an official act unless the government can show that applying criminal prohibition to the act would pose no dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. You spend a lot of time, Dr. Paul, being critical of the executive branch overreach, but at the same time, they try to clip the wings of the legitimate powers of the executive branch. And I think they got this right. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I think this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then Jonathan's article, and we're going to be talking about that, is interesting because he's an academician, and he mentions where he was not exactly right during the discussion of it, and then he brought up some alternatives to that. But I think his heart is with the direction of the court.
Yeah, that's going. Well, let's go ahead and put that one up then, because this is Turley writing today. I think it was. And again, this is the narrative falling apart from day one. I remember it was about 2 days after the January 6th, and you wrote a column saying this was not an insurrection, and people flipped out when you said that. But every day, every ruling that comes down tends to bolster that your initial view on that. If you can put that up, insurrection light. The Supreme Court downsizes the insurrection to largely trespassing, and he says he's talking about on Friday, Fisher versus the U.S. reject hundreds of charges in January 6th cases for obstruction of legal proceedings. For many cases, that will leave relatively minor offenses like trespass or unlawful entry. It's only the latest blow to efforts to portray the riot as a massive conspiracy to overthrow the government. While portrayed by pundits and press in strictly ideological terms, it actually produced an interesting lineup with, as you point out, Dr. Paul, Justice Brown Jackson voting with the majority and Justice Amy Coney Barrett voting in dissent. Nevertheless, it was a solid ruling that they were not guilty of obstruction of legal proceedings, but just trespassing. And even that would be a question, I think, because it's supposed to be the people's house, right?
Yeah.
It's a major, major defeat for this narrative.
Well, the trial is so annoying. How was it? It was a kangaroo court for all that. It should have been thrown out for that.
Yeah.
Nothing else. But the charges were originally obstruction of official proceedings.
Yeah.
And that's pretty vague. But the other one is conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government. And I thought, well, has the DOG ever conspired to defraud the liberties of the people? I mean, it's so crazy. But it's also, they had been charging Trump and others against the conspiracy against rights.
Yeah.
We don't want them to conspire against our rights. But in doing so, they threw the whole, Constitution out the window.
Yeah.
And just words. And they got away with it for so long. But it was mostly the perpetuation of this had to deal with, the complicity of the media.
Yeah.
The media was a ringleader there. And but it's interesting, though. Yeah, it's not quite total movement, significant movement in the right direction. Might have saved an election, and I think that this is pretty good. But we'll have to wait and see. And I think that when this all started on this conspiracy and why the takeover of the Capitol was occurring, all I can think of is somebody was able to portray this as, how often have they said, Trump called up and said, get those votes no matter how you can do it, cheat, lie, cheat, and steal.
Yeah.
And what he should have said is, do you think it should be okay for us to have a challenge to make sure they counted all the votes correctly?
Yeah.
They never talked about
It's wording. You're right. It's wording. If he just had some different wording, he'd get in less trouble. He needs to call you up.
But why didn't the Republicans do this? Sometimes I wonder where they are.
Yeah.
Because maybe they have their controllers versus their controllers.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head, though. What are you going to say to these people that have been rotting away in this horrible D.C. jail for years and years with all of these serious charges? You know how they packed the charges onto them. It turns out they didn't do anything except enter a building. You're so right. How are they going to get this time back? Time with their families, their grandchildren. Here's a couple of things from Jonathan's article. Just skip one and go to the one that says, I've always believed, because this kind of gets to the meat of what Turley's writing here. I've always believed the criminal charges were warranted for the riot of January 6, 2021, he writes. And I underline this part. But this week's decision shows how the Justice Department has wrongly prosecuted hundreds of people for the obstruction crime. It was all part of what Justice Department official Michael Sherwin proudly declared in a television interview that, quote, our office wanted to ensure that there was shock and awe. It worked because we saw through the media posts that people were afraid to come back to D.C. because they're like, if we go there, we're going to get charged. We wanted to take out those individuals that essentially were thumbing their noses at the public for what they did. I would recommend, Dr. Paul, that those hundreds of people be released and that Michael Sherwin take their place in a jail cell. Because talking about Americans like this shows to me, at least, that he deserves to be in a jail cell.
Yeah, as the case went along, and Jonathan, I think, sat in a courtroom.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And but the more information he got, the more willing he was is to shift his concrete opinion.
Yeah.
So that's not like these other people when they have a scenario and an agenda and they know exactly what it is. Get Trump, get Trump.
Yeah.
And that even started before anything happened. It started just because they hated his guts
Yeah.
before he was president.
Yeah.
Even.
Yeah.
And during the and that's why you already mentioned the one episode on the Russia Gate business.
Yeah.
That's pretty evil too.
Yeah.
You know?
Years and
Because
years.
that was illegal.
I'm looking at Dr. Robert Epstein's work, and of course, his information, his studies, and his research has been out there for quite a long time. And his exposure of the algorithm and of this kind of ubiquitous Google tyranny, which exposes Google for what it is, which is like a out of control military-industrial DARPA project, has built-in microphones on all of our equipment and surveillance equipment into all of our devices, so that nothing we do can possibly ever be private ever again. And if they have their way, they'll be building these devices into our bodies and other people's bodies around us as quick as possible. So it's interesting to me that Elon Musk he's a brilliant man in this era, a polymath and a genius of this era, but ultimately there's a hypocrisy there. I mean, he won't let AI from competitors such as Apple devices into his building. He'll allow a Faraday cage and allow it to be safely put up, but he's not going to allow ubiquitous AI technology from other companies to come into his building and just kind of create a LiDAR map of the entire inner working of his operations, right? He's not going to allow it. But at the same time, he wants to allow brain chips, right? So brain chips for all, right? Brain chips for people who need them, and doesn't recognize the profound hypocrisy in those two kind of colliding agendas and desires and policy movements. Like, because on one level, you can't really ban AI entirely, maybe on devices, but ultimately, what about when these brain chips? I mean, so there's a much larger composition of a discussion and a debate to be had there.
First of all, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. This is a very interesting subject because I think search engine results have always been a thing that people kind of take for granted, that the search engine results is going to give you the most significant results at the top. And they don't really think about the fact that this is kind of curated. And, we found it many times because we use two different search engines. We'll use Google, and then we'll say, well, if we can't find it on Google, use DuckDuckGo. And oftentimes, when you're looking for something very specific, you'll find that you can't find it on Google. Like, if it's in there, it's deep, 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 many pages in. Whereas DuckDuckGo will give you the relevant search results very quickly. So something's going on with search engines. And from your research, what you have found is that it can significantly affect the results of elections.
Well, not just that. It can affect how people think. It can affect your opinions, attitudes, purchases that you make. Pretty much, it's a mind control machine. It's the most powerful mind control machine that's ever been invented. And by the way, you should never use the Google search engine. Never. Why is that? Because this is what I call, and this is an S&M platform. Now, I'm not sure what S&M means to you. I don't want to pry into your personal life, but point is that, what I mean by S&M is that this is a surveillance and manipulation platform. On the surface, there are always two levels to everything with Google. On the surface, it's like a free public library kind of thing, right?
Yes.
That's always on the surface. Beneath the surface, it's something different. From a business perspective, it's an S&M platform. It exists for two purposes only, and that is to trick people into giving up lots and lots of personal information. Notice your public librarian doesn't do that. Notice that they don't actually do that.
Right.
And then it's also used for manipulation because they discovered quite a few years ago that if they control the ranking of the search results, they can control people's opinions, purchases, votes. Now, they can't control everyone's opinions because a lot of people already have strong opinions. So the people they're going after are the people who are undecided, the people who are vulnerable, and they know exactly who those people are. And they literally, your mind is putty in their hands. So you should never ever use Google or any other S&M product like Amazon Alexa is an S&M product, or the Google Home device or Android phones.
Android phones are bad.
An Android phone is an S&M device. It's always listening. It's always recording.
Android phones are always recording you?
Are you serious?
Yeah, I mean, I'm questioning this. I mean, I believe you, but I just want you to elaborate.
Oh yeah, there have been court cases in which the recordings have been subpoenaed from whoever's controlling that, that so-called personal assistant or that device, and courts have recovered recordings and transcripts when people are not even aware that they're being monitored.
I know that's the case with Alexa, right?
Yes,
but that's the case with Android phones as well.
Yes, in fact, Android phones, the equipment to prove this, which I didn't bring, but it's so cheap now that literally anyone can confirm this. Android phones, even if they're disconnected from your mobile service provider, even if you pull out the SIM card, okay, as long as the power is on, it is recording, tracking every single thing that you do. So if you use it to read things, if you use it to listen to music, you use it to shop, whatever it is, and of course your location is always tracked. Then when you go back online, the moment you're reconnected, it uploads all that information. So some people wonder why their batteries run down, sometimes even when you're not really doing anything with your phone. That's because with Android phones, I think it's 50 to 60 times per hour. It's uploading. It's uploading about 12 megabytes of data per hour. So that's a lot of energy. That requires energy. The kind of phone I have is completely different. It doesn't do anything like that.
What do you have, like a no agenda type phone? Do you know that show No Agenda?
No.
It's my friend Adam Curry, who's the original Podfather. He's the guy who invented podcasting, and his company develops these de-Googled phones where they take out all the tracking stuff, everything, and it's basically running on a different operating system.
Right. So I have a phone that runs on a different operating system. It's completely de-Googled. And
what do you got? Can you show it to me?
Yeah, I can show it to you.
I'm just interested.
It just looks like any old regular phone.
Right.
But it's not.
Is it running Linux? What's it running?
No, it's a different operating system.
Can you not tell me?
Well, I can.
Well, like you're trying to hide this.
Well, the point is, look. if you go to a website that says myprivacytips.com. Okay. That's an article. You get to an article of mine, and that article begins, I have not received a targeted ad on my mobile phone or my computer since 2014.
Wow.
So there is a different way to use all the technology that's out there so that you are not the product. Okay, so you're actually a user making use of services, but you're not the product. And it can be done. And is there a little inconvenience involved? Yes, very little. Is there some expense involved? Very, very little. All these services that you get for free, quote unquote, they're not free. You pay for them with your freedom. If you want to get them in a paid form so that you're not being tracked, we're talking $10 to $15 a month. Literally all of those so-called free services that are really, again, these S&M services all of them together are worth 10 or 15 bucks a month.
And how do you use your phone though? If you want to have a search engine, are you using a different search engine? Like, what are you using?
Well, that's changed for me over time, but right now I'm using the Brave browser.
I use that.
Okay, yeah. That's good. That's really the best one right now. And then Brave introduced a Brave search engine, which now, fortunately, very recently, you can make the default search engine on Brave. So Brave doesn't track at all. Brave works faster than Chrome. Chrome is Google's surveillance browser. And Brave works even faster. They're both built on what's called Chromium, so they're built on the same tech, except that Brave suppresses all ads. So it works much faster than Chrome does. And, now, again, you can make the default search engine on Brave, literally the Brave search engine. So,
do you ever run into websites where they don't work properly because it's trying to upload ads or something and maybe there's a glitch?
Very, very rarely. And then occasionally I'll go over to Firefox, because Firefox was actually developed by a guy named Brendan Ike, who might be really interesting for you to talk to, by the way. And then he left Mozilla, which was the nonprofit organization that developed Firefox. Oh, by the way, the connection between Firefox and Google, don't even get me started. It's disgusting. But the point is, Brendan got sick of that situation, and he founded his own company, and he developed Brave. So the same guy who developed Firefox developed Brave, very much into privacy, really a forward thinker. He's an amazing guy.
So when did you first become interested in digital surveillance and privacy and like what you're giving up by using these free services like Google?
I wasn't interested at all. I've been a researcher for 40 years, and I had a lot of research underway. I've done research on teenagers, on creativity, on stress management, all kinds of things. I'm still doing all that stuff. But on January 1st of the year 2012, I got 8 or 9 messages from Google telling me that my website had been hacked and that they were blocking access. So I thought, the first thing I thought was, why am I getting these notices from Google? Who made Google the sheriff of the internet? Why isn't this coming from the government? Why isn't it coming from some nonprofit organization? So that got my attention, and then, because I'm a coder, I've been a programmer since I was a teenager, and then I started wondering, wait a minute, okay, they're blocking me on the Google search engine. I get that. That's them, right? So they have these crawlers, that look at all the websites every day, and their crawler found some malware on my website. That happens all the day too. Everyone gets hacked. I'm sure you've been hacked, and Google itself has been hacked. So I get that they're blocking me on Google.com, the search engine. I get it. Okay, but I noticed they're also blocking me on Firefox, which is owned by a nonprofit. They're blocking me on Safari, which is owned by Apple. I thought, how could that be? These are completely separate companies. Took me a while to figure this out. I finally published a piece in U.S. News and World Report, an investigative piece called "The New Censorship," and I described 9 of Google's blacklists. This was 2016, so this is a while ago. In detail, I described 9 of Google's blacklists. I explained how the blacklists work. I explained Google can literally block access on multiple platforms that aren't even theirs. They can block access to any website that Google at one point in time, 2009, I think it was, I don't know, I might get the date wrong. Let's just say January, 30th. Google blocked access to the entire internet for 40 minutes. Google, anyway, in this article,
when you say that, with all browsers? When you say blocked access to the entire internet, so like if you use the Brave browser back then, did it even exist back then? Probably didn't exist then.
Brave didn't exist, but no, there were lots of search engines. Google was not the first search engine; it was the 21st search engine.
So, but what I'm saying is, with all web browsers, it blocked access to the internet.
It blocked access to virtually the entire internet to virtually everyone in the entire world for 40 minutes.
What?
And this was reported in the news.
So, is what's happening with their system is because so many people are searching for things, because they're monitoring so many different things to add to their search engine, do they have some sort of ultimate control over the internet in some weird way? Here it is right here. Google blacklists entire internet. Glitch causes the world's most popular search engine to classify all web pages as dangerous. Wow. Google placed the internet on a blacklist today after a mistake caused every site in the search engine's result page to be marked as potentially harmful and dangerous. Holy shit. The fact that they can even do this, I like how it gives you like at the top, this article is more than 12 years old.
Okay.
Imagine that, like 12 years means like it's ancient. Like they wrote it on stone tablets 12 years ago.
Yeah, but this is nonsense. This report is nonsense.
Is it?
Of course. Google is full of geeks. Okay, I'm part geek, so I can relate. I can speak geek if you want. And geeks for fun, okay, and sometimes for profit, but most of the time it's just for fun, just to be cool and get their kicks and show how powerful they are.
To be elite.
Yeah, so they do crazy things. So they shut down the internet. I guarantee you it was a geek thing, because you know why I figured that out? Because I kept wondering, why did they shut it down on this super early morning on a Saturday? Why? What's so special about that little period of time? And it took a while and I figured it out. It's because that is one of the only intervals of time in the entire week when every single stock market in the world is closed. So they did it to show that they could do it and have their fun, but they didn't want to get attention. And if they'd interfered with financial transactions, they would have gotten a lot of attention.
So no one was ever caught?
No one was ever caught, but they never denied that this happened either.
So this was done through Google, for sure. They know this how? It's reported in the news reports, and Google was queried, and Google said, yeah, that did happen. Yeah, we fixed it. So how does Google have the ability to even do something like that? How can that even be done?
Well, that's what I explained in that article. Is they have blacklists. Let me jump ahead, and then I'll. Okay. But let me just jump ahead for a second, because you got to see really how sinister this whole thing is. It's just, seriously, if you knew a half of what I know about all this dark tech stuff, you would just say the hell with it and just give up. You say, I don't want to bring up kids in this kind of world. This is too crazy. But anyway, blacklist. So
I feel like we need to stop you there and make you elaborate. Like, what are you saying?
Well, what I ended up doing, which I think we should get to later in some detail if you're still interested.
Yes.
What I ended up doing was I started doing randomized controlled experiments to see what kind of shenanigans are out there, to see what kind of power these companies have, especially Google. And I am still almost month by month making more discoveries, running more experiments, getting very disturbing data. I mean, so disturbing. We just figured out, I think within the last month, that a single question and answer interaction on Alexa, so you ask Alexa a question, and let's say it's about, I don't know, some political issue or political candidate, something you're undecided about. So you ask Alexa, and Alexa gives you back an answer. And the answer, let's say, has a bias. In other words, it favors, one candidate, favors one party, favors one cause, right? A single question and answer interaction on Alexa in a group of, say, 100 undecided people, can shift opinions by 40% or more. One interaction. If there are multiple questions asked on that topic over time, you can get shifts of 65% or more, with no one having the slightest idea that they have been manipulated.
So we got to do our little wrap up for our show here, and it's all about the next man up. And it's all about who is going to be willing to step into the breach here and to fight for American liberty and to stand in the gap and to resist the tyranny and the onslaught that you see coming down from this despicable murder swamp of Washington, D.C. And you can see that there's a pall and like a curse hanging over the whole place. Of course, Hillary Clinton comes out now and jabbers her Jesuit mouth off about, she stabs her brother Jesuit in the back there, Jesuit Biden, stabs him in the back, gets ready to take him down a notch or two, right? Of course, she's angling. She somehow in her fever dreams, she imagines she could be back in there. She could be back in the inner rooms, the inner sanctum, power chambers where she truly belongs, of course. And we got to we've been through a tough episode, and we've been through lots of content, a lot of material, and we're just working here to keep the tip of the spear moving forward, the fight for American liberty and American freedom. And this possibility, this brief window in time, however small it might be, for a chance to pass down a legacy of constitutional Republican values based on a Judeo-Christian biblical worldview. Of course, as we always say, we didn't even have a shot in the dark of having the philosophical strength, the intellectual fuel and ammunition that was required, the incredibly strong educational basis that was necessary to arrive at Adam Smith to really give us a standpoint for this idea that capitalism and free markets should belong to everyone and should be a freely thriving societal institution that doesn't just belong to as a captive markets, totally owned by the monopolists of their day, as far as the popes and the kings and the princes and dukes of the medieval world who overruled all people everywhere at all times. They ran a serfdom, right, of commoners who they would just run into the ground and use like slaves. And so it was this point in time, it was this break in the darkness of the Dark Ages when we had this fleeting glimpse into the truth of God's heart, when we had exposed to the people and to the vox populi, right, the voice of the people, was brought to them the word of God, which of course, as we said over and over again, had been kept under wraps in hard to understand Latin, or Greek languages, only for a very few select scholars to be able to read. But the popular documents, the amazing and the wonderful history of God's people and his promises to the world were brought forward in the publishing of 1611, the King James Version Bible. And that is when you see the world turned on its head. That's when you see everything totally change. And of course, there had been a complex struggle in the world against the Roman papacy and the tyranny and the absolute domination and hegemony that the Roman papacy demanded of the world. And of course, they had absolute control over the hearts and minds of men all across Europe. It didn't matter what language or what country, if it was Spain or Austria or England or France, it didn't matter where you go. The realms and the universal imperium of the monarchical lords and the medieval bloodline feudal nobility, white and black nobility that existed. And of course, as we always say, the white nobility was selected all around Europe by the black nobility, who was many, many, many centuries older and who occupied, for the most part, and ran their domination ultimately from Italy, all throughout Italy. There were ancient black nobility families who had no interest in giving up their luxurious and powerful operations of gathering massive wealth throughout the entire world. And they would set up and establish these white nobility, these other smaller, lesser family lines who would be required to rule and to hold the place of the monarch in their little area and have their little fiefdoms. And so that's how you could get entire areas like England controlled by such a small city of London, the banking mile, right? How could a little banking mile end up controlling the entire operational force and military of Great Britain?
ultimately those who you owe money to and who finance you ultimately end up owning you. And you can see, if you could just follow the money, if you follow the money back from the inner temple and temple round, the operations of the Knights Templar there at the Temple Bar, right? Some things you can go ahead and look up at the Temple Bar. And we're not talking about the local pub, right? The Temple Bar that was set up by the Knights Templar a long time ago. And of course, you can see that's at the center of the City of London operations. And so the Papal Knights and their power structure is extending very far from the center of power, which is in Rome, all the way to the outskirts of Hadrian's Wall and beyond, right? And so you can see that as we move forward, we have to keep our eye on the ball. I mean, a lot of these other operations out there are going to talk about the politics of the day. They're going to talk about different political dialectics that we're being faced with today between red and blue, etc. And you can see that the right-wing leaning political establishment in this country is being whipped into a furor. And I think that they're going to be really outraged when they find out that Trump is not going to win. And of course, nobody wants to see the country fall into chaos. Nobody wants to see a disaster or see America fall into total ruins and chaos and structural instability down to the deep core. So it won't just be about one political faction losing, but about the entire structural, sophisticated complex of American life being destroyed, root and branch. So you can imagine that they're going to take down the political system as at the same time they're overrunning the judiciary with their toxic and poisonous confederation, right? You have the Obama Bolshevik confederation. You really can't say Biden anymore because Biden is not really there. It's really just Obama running the show in the background there. And so this is a left-wing, fifth column control project that's being set into motion. You can see out there in the Arizona race, the guy got caught with the key fobs full of election ballot information, and he was sneaking in, sneaking out. And we really can't get a clear story on what's going on with the guy. But he's obviously a left-wing activist who's there to steal the election. He's there as an opportunist to make sure that Democrats cannot lose and Republicans cannot win.
Okay, Tuesday, 25 June, the year of our Lord 2024. By the way, Gina Swoboda is one of the best. That's why she's there. She wants urgency. Of course, we must have urgency. So, Caroline Rent, real quickly, just summarize again where we stand with this. And we know it's not at first. And for the first 24 hours, I kind of with the team, I said, "Is this thing real or not?" It's one of these things that pops up. You got to make sure it's real. But then when you see the obfuscation, and you see people like the FBI, and you see the Washington Post even mention it, trying to get ahead of it. There's something here that does not meet the eye. And bottom line is, Maricopa County has rubbed our nose, and Steve Ricker and the Gates guy, that entire crowd out there, have rubbed the nose of Kerry Lake and the MAGA movement and Trump and Boris and everybody. Oh, you guys are wingnuts. This is the most secure. This is as bad as the guy that worked at DHS. This is the most secure place. We're Fort Knox. You can't get in here. Nothing can happen. And now you see this. So just give me a quick summary, Caroline, and then I'm going to ask Gina once again, what action are we taking today? I'd go over and I just have people flood the zone over at the prosecutor's office. Just go and sit in and say, hey, we have a citizen's complaint. We want people to start being investigated and arrested on this. Go ahead, ma'am.
Well, remember what happened in 2022, what happened to Kerry Lake. 61% of the tabulators in Maricopa County failed on Election Day, effectively shutting down Election Day for 6 hours. We've been suing over this tabulator problem over and over again, and they just keep telling us, oh, there's no way there could have been some coordinated, advanced effort to, have these machines malfunction. And now here we are like, hello, this 27-year-old kid that used to work at a left-wing NGO just infiltrated Maricopa County. Yes, he was caught, but still he was able to leave with 2 separate key fobs, one to enter the building, the other one to actually change the tabulator settings. He brought them home, and the question we should all be asking is, who paid him to do this? I'm sorry, but this individual, I believe, was evicted from his home in 2020. He was arrested for theft in 2023. So clearly someone like that can be compromised. So it is my belief that someone paid him from one of these left-wing NGOs to go get those 2 security things, bring them back to his house, and who was he going to give them to, and who was paying him? That's what I think we should all be looking into. I think there's a tremendous sense of urgency. Remember that ballots drop in the Arizona primary in 1 week. This is 1 week out from when the ballots drop for our primary. So what is going on here? Everyone should be on top of this, and reporters need to do their jobs and go look into this. I mean, if this was happening on the other side, on the right, I can tell you what, ProPublica would already have like 10 reporters on the ground at this guy's house.
Calling Vaughn Hilliard. This is your beat, bro. Where are you? I expect to see this on on Nicole Wallace this afternoon, a big breaking news thing on here. The last thing, who the FBI and how does this guy end up with lots of social media and then now he's only got Truth Social? Where how did that happen? How did that magically happen?
It makes no sense. He is still in prison right now. He's still in jail, being held in a jail cell because of his past. They won't give him bond because of his past conviction. So no one can explain to me how all of his social media sites have been wiped, with the exception of a Truth Social account, which is a bizarre account. I went through it, and so someone did it. I don't believe it was him unless he has a cell phone in the jail cell.
Okay, which is supposed to be it's supposed to be a bozo no. Let's go to once again, Gina. You're beloved because you got this gig because you're a fighter on this very topic. So where are we going to go on this today?
I need help. So hit me at azgop.com. Hit the donate button. I'm going to have to get my own legal team involved immediately if I don't get a response from RNC. It's 8:04 a.m. in Arizona. They asked for 26 minutes. So if they're not willing to put a person on the ground filing a writ of mandamus today, then we're going to have to go our own way and get it done. And we will. Upper right corner on that.
A writ of mandamus. Okay, let's everybody pile into the AZ GOP and let's get their back, and we'll make sure the folks over the RNC. Let's just get coordinated, folks.
Until we're ready to go to the mat, until we're ready to really fight and stick up for our values, to stick up for our Republican institutions in this country, in order to get a really, truly constitutional Republican form of democracy, you have to respect the wishes of all the ballots, real ballots, and you ultimately are bringing in millions and millions and millions of people who are not supposed to be here, who are in the population, who are not really recognized, but of course they're going to try to vote and they're going to try to get driver's license and try to participate in society at every level, and they're going to try to throw elbows when you tell them, hey, you're not illegal, man, you're not really supposed to be here, you're an invader, you're basically an illegal invader in this country, stealing our democratic, watering down and diluting and perverting our democratic systems here in this country. They're going to want to take America for themselves, of course. So the process of deteriorating and pulverizing America's history and its future is well underway. So we have to see here now that if we're not willing to stick up and fight against these institutions, that there's people that have gotten to positions of power in judicial chambers, inside FBI field agencies, right? All kinds of secret CIA debriefing rooms, right, are filled with the traitors who are here to destroy America. We have to recognize that. We have to recognize that we are all that's left. We are the resistance that's remaining, and we have to recognize that if we can't survive, if we can't carry on another generation of children in this country who are not able to go to school without getting perverted and debauched by homosexual pornography in the classrooms or whatever kind of transgender perverted agenda is there to destroy a young child's mind. And of course, young children aren't even ready for heterosexual sexual thoughts yet, right? I mean, they're just children. They just need time to grow and play and just be innocent. And later on, they can begin to understand that their body is developing and they're going to become an adult. And there's going to be this other level of chemistry and utility within the human body that they can learn all about. But of course, when you jump in there in the third grade and you give them the sagging testicles and wiener hanging out from the transgender skirt, then you debauch and pervert the children before they even have a chance to grow, and you severely limit the possibility that the next generation is going to be productive, right, and have kids, right, without just going and having sex with every orifice and hole that's out there that doesn't produce a child, right? If it's an orifice that produces a child, then they won't have sex with it, right? They're only interested in some kind of weird animal costumes, like clip-clopping around, like with horse saddles and horse uniforms on, or whatever bestial doggy pet doggy games, or whatever sick, disgusting filth they can involve themselves with. They'll involve themselves with it because they've been debauched, they've been molested, they've been perverted at a young age, so that destroys their sexual development, right? And I think that goes without saying. We've known that since 1862, since the Bonesmen, right? The Bonesmen out of Yale established the American Medical Association. They also established the American Psychiatric Association, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're well into the game of formation of human psychology and well into the game of how to disrupt it and destroy and degenerate, and whole classrooms full, whole county and cities full of young kids being perverted and their developmental stages being annihilated all at the same time. So if we're not willing to fight against this, what was described by what J. Edgar Hoover described as a conspiracy that was so vast. Here, I'll have the quote here. The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous they cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to the realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst, right? So that's J. Edgar Hoover, the original FBI director. I'm sure he had a concept of what he was understanding, what he was talking about. And of course, you can't really like pin this down to a simple, one-dimensional comprehension of the problem any more than you can just really pin down what the federal government is doing to us with a felony charge of bank robbery. Of course, what the federal government is doing to us is a charge of bank robbery, at least a felony charge, but it's just so much more, right? And so what you have to understand is that the conspiracy that's facing us encompasses a radical contingent of communists, but it encompasses so much more, and it's so much more comprehensive of a combination of events and men who are there to make sure that if nothing else happens in this entire world, as surely as the sun comes up in the morning, that they ultimately are going to prevail in annihilating America and destroying it and salting the earth so that it's totally destroyed. So that the American people can expect to be utterly and totally annihilated out of existence. There won't be anywhere you can go where you can be safe or be saved from the plan that these people are trying to enact against you and your children. Right? So it's nothing for them to use chemtrails and just spray barium and all kinds of and cesium and all kinds of crazy chemicals all over you and your farm and your entire county, right? That's just the least of the damage they want to do. They don't care about putting brain chips in you or manipulating your DNA or corrupting your children's future or destroying their sexual development. Or those are just the manipulative and vile tactics that you've been able to discern so far. But there's so much more in the works and that they put into destroying America and destroying you that you would not be able to believe it, even if someone told you. So as we're going forward, you can see that there's a lot of stuff happening here in the world. It's pretty amazing. You can see they're doing a report that White House officials and White House staff were infuriated when Hunter Biden insisted on going past them into the room and going into secret briefings that the president was having. Can you believe this guy? This incest pornographer, drug rapist, pedophile is a traitor. He's a traitor. He should be, in my opinion, he should be tried, and if found guilty, he should be hanged. He should be hanged for his crimes. But just a few short decades ago, real men in government, real men and women in executive branches and as legislators and judges would know how to handle such a scummy rat bastard son of a bitch as this scumbag Hunter Biden is, right? He should be put at the bottom. We should, yeah. And of course, you can see that he's in good company because he's there up there with Merrick Garland and Alejandro Mayorkas and all these other scumbags, all the others deformed and withered cunts that are running around here serving Obama, serving this disgusting anti-American perverted agenda. They're going to get brought down, guys. And really the question is whether the entire edifice and the entire temple of this American structure is going to be brought down on their heads, or whether we're going to be able to save the structure, save the institutions, and preserve our way of life here before we root them out. Of course, I think if they were able to annihilate, destroy, and set everything into flame and into destruction here in America, they would just be totally pleased with that, right? I think they would find themselves accomplishing the great desires of their communist forefathers and Marxist forebears that came before them. And so we have to recognize these battles are going to come to blows, right? It might not come out to your farm or to your apartment complex or to your neck of the city where you live or your particular part of the county where you tend animals or do farming or who knows what industry or way of life you partake here in America, but somewhere someone out there is going to get stuck between the reels. Just like this January 6th, it looks like the DOJ is, since they got knocked down by the Supreme Court and charging all these people on these ludicrous, unjust, idiotic charges that they have put up against all these Americans, these patriots, sending old ladies to jail. And of course, this is all after a preposterous Fedsurrection, the Fedsurrection that was in many, many ways established and set up by the federal government itself to put in various, we can't tell you how many federal agents were inside the crowd and all this stuff. They had to set up one side of the electorate. They wanted to set up American Republicans, right? American Trump supporters. And so we have to be careful as we go forward because ultimately Trump as much as we love him, and as much as he has been positioned to appear to be the Republican conservative man. I mean, who knows? Who knows how many of these people are Alex Jones? How many of these people are being used by the federal government? Maybe they don't even really fully understand they're being used. They're being used as a canary in the coal mine, as a litmus test, as a factor in their equation of tyranny that ultimately is there to get all the license plates, get all the IP addresses of everyone who's at a certain event, and then just spend the next few years breaking them down and breaking them into a total persecution, right? We said there was a coming American Inquisition, and I think they just got started, guys, because they're going to go back and recharge all these January 6 people. They're not going to let it go. They're going to continue to charge more and more and more people who were there and people who weren't really there. Maybe you just made a comment about it. Well, pretty soon you're going to get charged too. And you can see what will happen, how the panic will set in if Trump doesn't get elected. And you can see that it's the whole Q limited hangout, the backstabbing of America will be really in full effect if Trump doesn't win, because ultimately he's being used as a cattle call to establish who all the patriot, unvaxxed American patriots are. It doesn't matter, how many of there might be 60, 80, 100 million Americans who are just not going to go with the program. I think these guys are totally set to do what they have to do to get you guys sent to FEMA camps, get us all sent to re-education camps. They talk about it constantly. There's 100 million people in this country that have to be re-educated because we won't accept their transgender perverted values. We won't accept their disgusting murder swamp tyranny up there in Washington, D.C. We won't accept that they have taken over the institutions with their left-wing, anti-American, pro-Marxist agenda, pro-Hamas, pro-perversion in the classroom. Like, nobody cares what you do when you're alone, but stop telling the kids about it, right? That's what the meme says, but they love it. They're not happy to sit alone and do perverted, ghastly, homosexual, masturbation, sex practices with each other, right? They have to go and tell kids. They're not capable of having kids. They're not even capable of raising kids alone, but they're not physically capable of it either in their body because their bodies will not allow them to, as they butt plug each other, they can't reproduce, right? So they can't share their values with a family because they can't have a family. So ultimately they have to go and share all their sickening and perverted ideas with the classroom, with kids in the classroom. And we're allowing this. We have to stop allowing this. We have to stop allowing this perverted culture to continue at the expense of our own children. And it's really bizarre to sit here and watch as the Biden family is like backed into a corner, and you can see that somehow Jill Biden is jumping out in front of the mics and screeching about how Trump is a liar, right? And it's bizarre. It's bizarre. Watch them try to like maintain their power. And of course, Kamala Harris is a professional prostitute. In her background, she had been a call girl. She had been a call girl for Willie Brown, or what was it, Joe Brown? Some governor, some like really high-powered governor. They say he was a Jesuit of California, right? Before Gavin Newsom's time. He was the forerunner of destroying California long before Gavin Newsom got there. And of course, she was the blowjobber. That's what they say. She was really good at it too. And look how they turned her around, where they put her up into the halls of power, right? And she really, with the powerful stroke of her strong and powerful neck, as you can observe, she managed to get herself into, the vice presidency, right? I mean, talk about blowing your way to the top. It's really incredible. And of course, she's a disaster. No one wants to see her. I mean, that will be the end of America. And of course, that's what we're faced with. We're faced with these hyenas, these ratchet, low-life, scumbag hyenas and backbiters and backstabbers, all like tearing themselves apart, trying to get a control of the golden ring of power. And God knows why they want to do that, because they want to take our guns away. Of course, the same Constitution that establishes the presidency also establishes my gun rights. So it doesn't work that way, guys. You don't get to take a constitutional office and then take apart the Constitution that gives you your office, right? So it's the same logic test. It's the same IQ test we go through every single time. If you have a presidency, it exists by the Constitution. And if you have gun rights, it exists by the Constitution. They both are derived from the same power. So you can't take one away without taking the other away. As soon as the president turns to take my gun rights, he's no longer the president, or she, right? That's how it works. And so based with this kind of situation, it's more than whether we have these massive nuclear bombs and suitcase nukes, and we have all kinds of laser weapons now. And really, guns are obsolete now, but I still have the right to bear it. And you can send in your robot dogs, and we're going to try to shoot them with
I'm sure Americans will try to shoot them with their guns. When you send the robot dogs in, or the flying flamethrower bats, or whatever kind of drone equipment you send in to try to terrorize Americans, we will need to be able to shoot that shit down with something, right? I mean, that's, ultimately we need to hunt. We have our rights, and they're not going anywhere. It's never going to be changed. It doesn't matter who you put into office. It can't be changed. And ultimately, when they go to test it, when they start to do the door kicking and to try to take away, I guess there's 150 million Americans with guns. I guess when you go to try to take away their guns, then you've won the prize of destroying America, right? That's the ultimate goal. It's to try to turn the thing against itself, so that the powers that are established are deriding and destroying the powers that established the power, right? If you're not confused yet, it's okay. We're going to get there. And ultimately, we have no fear of the disgusting and vile tyrants, these wicked and evil men who are up there. And we have no fear of these individuals they send down to try to enforce their policies and try to put a muzzle on us and try to make us think their thoughts and either re-educate us how they want. We're not going to be afraid of any of them. And there's nothing they can do to control us. We're not governable. This idea of a post-constitutional America, it's not acceptable. We're going to go ahead and take apart the administrative state. We're going to take apart all these agencies that try to run our lives for us and try to mess up our kids and don't educate association and don't bring injustice departments, right? Department of Homeland Insecurity and Invasion, right? All these departments can be totally destroyed. You can totally take them all down. We've said this before, the FBI, the CIA, none of them have any part in America's future if they won't listen to what the will of the American people is. And of course, just bringing in stampeding a bunch of foreigners and invaders into the population is not an answer, guys. It's not acceptable. Just to try to use our intelligence agencies to try to run intelligence operations and psyops against the American people and to run Fedsurrection, treason, right? That's treason. That's treason against the American people. And ultimately having us thrown in jail is most despicable of all. The Department of Justice is so despicable and so vile. They're so disgusting with their presumption of righteousness and morality, as if somehow whatever they do goes without any examination, and as if their calling and their mission statement is so untouchably established by some kind of divine mandate from on high, right? They consider themselves to be unquestionable, as they do everything in their power to destroy America and destroy the population and go against and violate the will of the American people. So we have to move fast. We have to steel ourselves, and we have to decide in our hearts, guys, that we're not going to allow these individuals to be able to destroy America like this and go on without any consequences. Of course, we're going to make sure we bring the consequences. We're going to make sure that we use the ballot box the same way they did, right? They used the ballot box. We're going to do the same thing that they did to us. I think that's what it comes down to. And if it comes to this point where I think it doesn't matter I think it's going to be a slow movement, or in my estimation, it's going to be a gradual decline. My main concern is that if we are totally owned right now as the American people and we're turning towards a solution in the form of Donald Trump, and it turns out to be just another owned and controlled persona of the political charade of the power elite that is going on the Uniparty in Washington, D.C. And of course, you can see that the power elite in Washington, D.C. have Republican and Democrat professional politicians who are tied in with the archdiocese and the Vatican power structure. And so I don't trust the right wing or the left wing. I think they're creating a dialectic extremism, a overblown internecine conflict within the United States that it's not organic, and we don't need to have this particular struggle. But they're trying to turn the thumbscrews and turn the misery index up and turn down the dial for dialogue and political resolution. And so since they're ginning it up and anteing up and pushing us so close to the edge, I think that the idea is to bring America into a catastrophic civil war at the same time that we are going to have to fight a third world war overseas. And of course, most likely there will be a full land invasion of the United States. We've been talking that for a long time. We've been spelling out how that would occur in California, how California is being softened up and being prepared for that particular invasion. And so right now is the moment, guys, and if we don't get our act together, it's done. And our children will curse our names.
Here's just a quick reminder, guys, of our sponsor, Wendy'sLimited.com. Wendy'sLimited.com has all the hottest new styles, all the most incredible boutique fashion designers available to you. And of course, we're all American, and we're all about making America great again at wendyslimited.com, guys. wendyslimited.com.